My name is Fiona. I am 33 years old, and exactly 2 days before Christmas, my father handed me a 20-page grocery list. He smirked and told me that my older brother Brandon had 15 very important friends spending the holidays at our family estate, and they expected me to cook clean and serve them like a hired maid. My brother nodded, telling me to cancel whatever sad, lonely plans I had. I just smiled and took the list. That very night, I packed my bags and flew to Hawaii. When they woke up to an empty kitchen, Brandon's face turned pale, but the real surprise was still waiting for them. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your worth. The air in the living room of my parents' Connecticut estate was suffocatingly warm from the massive stone fireplace. The atmosphere, however, was ice cold. My father William stood by the coffee table and casually tossed a thick, stapled packet onto the glass surface. "Read this over, Fiona," he instructed, not bothering to look me in the eye. "You need to start prepping the kitchen immediately." I picked up the heavy packet. It was a 20-page itinerary, complete with dietary restrictions, wine pairing notes, and a meticulously detailed grocery list that would easily cost thousands of dollars. I stared at the cover page, confusion slowly morphing into a familiar, heavy dread. "What is this, Dad?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly even. My older brother Brandon strolled into the room. He was adjusting the cuffs of a tailored suit that our parents had undoubtedly paid for. He flashed his signature arrogant grin, the exact same smile that had charmed our parents into funding his entire life. "I have 15 VIP investors flying in for a 3-day Christmas retreat," Brandon announced, pouring himself a glass of sparkling water. "These are top-tier venture capitalists. I am pitching them my new tech startup on Christmas morning, and everything needs to be flawless." My mother, Catherine, glided in right behind him, her hands clasping her pearl necklace. She looked at me with an expression that fell somewhere between pity and a strict command. "Your brother is on the verge of securing a massive acquisition deal," Catherine said, her tone syrupy, but incredibly firm. "We need you to cancel whatever sad, lonely holiday plans you have made. You're going to stay here and handle the cooking, the cleaning, and the hosting. Brandon needs to focus on his pitch, not domestic chores." I looked at the three of them, a perfect portrait of blind entitlement. I was 33 years old. I had my own life, my own business, and my own plans for the holidays. Yet here they were demanding I act as unpaid domestic labor for my 36-year-old brother and his corporate buddies. "I am an event planner, Mom," I replied calmly. "I am not a live-in maid, and I already have plans for Christmas." Catherine scoffed, waving her hand dismissively, as if my life was a minor inconvenience she could simply swat away. "Oh, please, Fiona," she sneered. "What plans?" "Organizing another budget wedding for one of your little clients. You can reschedule. Your brother is building a real empire." I tightened my grip on the itinerary. My family publicly perceived my career as a struggling small-time gig. They had no idea that I was the founder and sole owner of a premier luxury concierge firm that catered to billionaires and celebrities. They did not know about my silent partnerships in top-tier venture capital firms. I had kept my wealth a strict secret for exactly this reason. Any money or success I had would immediately be demanded by my parents to fund Brandon's endless string of failures. Brandon sighed dramatically, sinking into the plush leather sofa. "Come on, Fiona. Do not be difficult. This is family. We support each other." Support each other. I repeated, letting the words hang heavily in the air. My mother took a step forward, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "It is the absolute least you can do after we generously let you live in our basement last year during your divorce. You were a mess, and we put a roof over your head. You owe us this." Her words were meant to be a weapon. They were designed to strike at my deepest vulnerabilities and remind me of my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. But I was no longer the broken woman who had sought refuge in my childhood home. I met my mother's harsh gaze without blinking. "I paid you $2,000 a month in rent to live in an unfinished basement, Mom. I paid you on time every single month while you secretly funneled that exact same money to pay off the debts from Brandon's third failed app. The room went completely silent. Brandon shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, suddenly very interested in his phone screen. My father's face darkened with intense anger, his absolute authority challenged by the daughter he viewed as a failure. "We do not speak about family finances with that tone," William snapped, taking a threatening step toward me. "Your brother is a visionary. Tech startups require capital and risk. You would not understand that managing seating charts and balloon arches. Now, are you going to do this for your family, or are you going to prove once again that you only care about yourself?" I looked down at the 20-page packet in my hands. The grocery list alone included items like imported truffles, Wagyu beef, and vintage champagne. They expected me to shop, prep, cook 3 meals a day, clean the guest rooms, and serve 15 demanding investors, all while enduring their constant disrespect. They wanted a scapegoat. They wanted a servant. I took a deep breath and let a slow, bright smile spread across my face. I looked at my father, then at my mother, and finally at Brandon, whose arrogant smirk had returned to his face. "You know what, Dad?" I said, my voice smooth and perfectly polite. "You are absolutely right. Family supports family. I will take this list, and I will make sure you get exactly what you deserve for Christmas." Catherine let out a long theatrical sigh of relief. Finally, a bit of maturity. "Start with the guest rooms on the second floor. They need fresh linens before the investors arrive tomorrow afternoon." I nodded, folding the packet and tucking it under my arm. "I will get right on it." I walked out of the living room, leaving them to their self-congratulatory chatter about Brandon's impending success. I climbed the grand staircase, walked into the guest room I was supposed to be staying in, and locked the door behind me. I did not go to the kitchen. I did not check the linen closets. I did not pull out a recipe book to begin meal prep. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and logged into my private banking portal. I checked the balances on my corporate account, smiled at the 8-figure numbers staring back at me, and then opened a new tab for an elite travel agency I personally owned. It was 11 o'clock at night when the house finally went completely quiet. My parents and Brandon were fast asleep, dreaming of the billionaire investors who would supposedly save their financial future. I moved silently through the dark, opulent hallways of my childhood home. I wore a tailored linen suit and pulled a single designer suitcase behind me. The wheels glided soundlessly over the hardwood floors. When I reached the kitchen, the massive marble island gleamed under the moonlight filtering through the windows. I took the apron my mother had laid out for me, folded it neatly into a perfect square, and placed it right in the center of the island. Next to the apron, I placed a bright yellow sticky note. I uncapped a pen and wrote a single word in bold, dark ink: Aloha. I did not leave a grocery list. I did not leave prepped ingredients. I left them with nothing but the reality of their own incompetence. I walked out the back door, slipping into the freezing Connecticut night. A black town car was already waiting for me at the end of the driveway, the engine idling quietly in the cold air. The driver loaded my bag, and I climbed into the heated back seat, pulling out my personal phone. With a few quick taps, I completely blocked my father, my mother, and my brother from contacting me. As the car pulled away from the estate, heading toward the airport, I pulled out my business phone and checked my flight details. A red-eye, first-class direct flight to Maui. I was not just running away from their toxic demands. I was heading toward a high-stakes corporate retreat of my own, where I would be making decisions that shaped entire industries. They thought I was a failure. They thought I was a servant they could command at will. They had absolutely no idea that the very ground they were standing on, the very investors Brandon was trying to court, were all connected to the empire I had quietly built while they were busy looking down on me. I leaned back against the plush leather seat and watched the snow fall outside the window. Tomorrow morning, my parents and my golden child brother would wake up to a dead empty kitchen and 15 hungry VIPs arriving at their door. The panic would be beautiful, but the real destruction was only just beginning. The first-class cabin was a sanctuary of hushed voices and dim lighting, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of my parents' living room. I settled into the plush seat, accepting a glass of champagne from the flight attendant. As the plane taxied down the runway, I pulled out my phone and switched it to airplane mode. The satisfaction was immediate. I was finally cutting the cord. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the gentle hum of the engines lull me to sleep. For the first time in years, I wasn't anxious about what crisis I'd be expected to solve tomorrow. By 8 in the morning, the Connecticut estate was usually buzzing with activity. My mother, Catherine, would be directing a symphony of culinary preparations, her voice a sharp instrument cutting through the holiday cheer. My father, William, would be holed up in his study, emerging only to issue commands or complain about the noise. And Brandon, the golden child, would be sleeping off whatever extravagant indulgence he'd partaken in the night before his arrival, heralded only by demands for fresh coffee and immediate service. Today, however, the silence was absolute. Catherine patted down the grand staircase, tightening her silk robe against the morning chill. She expected to smell roasting turkey, to hear the clatter of pans and the rhythmic chopping of vegetables. She expected to see me aproned and obedient, orchestrating the feast that would impress Brandon's VIPs. Instead, she found the kitchen pristine, spotless, and completely devoid of life. The massive marble island, usually a staging ground for culinary masterpieces, held only 2 items: my neatly folded apron and a bright yellow sticky note. She approached the island, her brow furrowing in confusion. She picked up the note. A single word was scrawled across it in my precise handwriting: Aloha. The silence of the house shattered a moment later. Catherine screamed, her voice shrill with rising panic. "William, get down here right now." The sound of heavy footsteps pounded down the stairs. "What is it, Catherine?" William demanded, rushing into the kitchen, his face flushed. "What is going on?" Catherine pointed a trembling finger at the empty kitchen counters. "She left," Catherine shrieked. "Fiona left. There is no food, no prep, nothing. The VIPs arrive in hours and she left us with nothing." Upstairs, the commotion finally roused Brandon. He stumbled down the stairs, his eyes bloodshot, a half-empty bottle of expensive water in his hand. "What is all the yelling about?" he slurred, rubbing his temples. "I need quiet. I have the most important pitch of my life today." William snatched the sticky note from the island and thrust it into Brandon's face. "Your sister left," he bellowed. "She packed her bags and abandoned us. There is no food for your investors." Brandon stared at the note, the color rapidly draining from his face. The reality of the situation crashed over him, sobering him instantly. The smug entitlement evaporated, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. "This cannot be happening," Brandon muttered, his voice trembling. "They are arriving at 4. They expect a 5-star experience. Mr. Caldwell expects perfection. If this weekend is a disaster, the deal is dead." He fumbled for his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. The family group chat, usually reserved for coordinating Brandon's achievements and demanding my assistance, exploded with activity. The notifications flooded my screen as I sat on a plush lounge chair in a private cabana overlooking the pristine waters of Maui. The gentle sound of waves breaking against the shore was the only soundtrack to my morning. I took a slow sip of my mimosa, the cool, sweet liquid, a perfect counterpoint to the warm tropical sun. I tapped the screen and opened the chat. "Brandon, where the hell are you? Get back here right now. This is not a joke. My investors are arriving in hours. You are ruining everything." "Catherine, how could you be so selfish, Fiona? After everything we have done for you, come back immediately." "William, you are a disgrace to this family. Return home at once, or do not bother ever coming back." The messages were a predictable barrage of entitlement, manipulation, and rage. They were not concerned about where I was or if I was safe. They were only concerned about the inconvenience my absence caused them. I watched the messages pour in, feeling a profound sense of detachment. The guilt that would have paralyzed me years ago was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They needed me, but they despised me. They relied on me, but they refused to respect me. I set my mimosa down on the small teak table beside me. I typed my response slowly, deliberately. ensuring every word was perfectly chosen. Fiona flight landed at 5 a.m. Try ordering a pizza. I hit send and immediately locked the screen. The sheer audacity of my response, the casual dismissal of their manufactured crisis, was more powerful than any argument I could have made. I knew exactly how that text would be received. I pictured Brandon staring at his phone, his perfectly styled hair suddenly looking disheveled, the tailored suit feeling too tight. I pictured my mother, her face blotchy with anger, realizing that her favorite weapon, guilt, had completely lost its effectiveness. Back in Connecticut, Brandon stared at his phone in disbelief. "She is in Hawaii," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She actually flew to Hawaii." William snatched the phone from his hand, reading the text. "A pizza." He roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "She expects us to serve Mr. Caldwell pizza. The man eats at Michelin-star restaurants every night. He will walk out the door the second he smells cheap takeout." Catherine paced the kitchen, her hands fluttering nervously. "We need a solution," she demanded, her voice shrill. "We cannot let them see us like this. We need to look successful, capable, in control. Brandon, do something. You are the entrepreneur. Fix this." Brandon took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. The panic was still there, but he forced it down, clinging to the false confidence that had gotten him this far. He slicked his hair back and straightened his posture. "Do not worry, Mom," Brandon said, his voice dripping with forced bravado. "I will handle this. Fiona was just a budget event planner anyway. I will hire a luxury private chef service. I will get the best caterers in the city. They will whip up a feast that will make Mr. Caldwell forget this entire mess. I will turn this into a win." Catherine let out a shaky breath, grasping at the lifeline he offered. "Yes, of course. You are right. You always figure things out, Brandon. Call them immediately. Money is no object. We will put it on the credit cards if we have to." Brandon nodded, already scrolling through his phone for contacts. "I am calling Apex Lifestyle right now," he announced, his chest puffing out slightly. "They are the premier concierge service on the East Coast. They handle events for billionaires all the time. They will send a team over immediately. They will not say no to my money." He tapped the screen, dialing the number for the most exclusive catering service in the state, entirely unaware that he was dialing the very company I had built from the ground up. He was calling the empire I owned, the empire that had a strict, non-negotiable blacklist policy, and his name was right at the top of it. The dial tone rang through the expansive kitchen as Brandon put his phone on speaker. He leaned against the marble island, crossing his arms in a display of unbothered confidence. William and Catherine watched him with bated breath, their entire social and financial survival hanging on this single phone call. The ringing stopped, replaced by a smooth, professional voice. "Thank you for calling Apex Lifestyle, the premier choice for bespoke concierge services. This is Julianne speaking. How may I assist you with your luxury experience today?" Brandon flashed a triumphant look at his parents. "Julianne, hi. This is Brandon Williams. I have an emergency request, but I know you guys are the best in the business, so I am sure you can handle it. I need a full private chef team and an event staff at my family estate in Connecticut, immediately. I am hosting 15 high-net-worth individuals for a 3-day Christmas retreat. We need a customized menu starting with hors d'oeuvres at 4 o'clock today, followed by a 5-course dinner." There was a brief pause on the line. The dispatcher maintained her perfectly polished tone. "I understand, Mr. Williams. A same-day holiday dispatch for a party of that size is highly unusual, but we do occasionally accommodate emergency requests for our premium members. Let me pull up your client profile. May I have the spelling of your last name and the estate address?" Brandon rattled off the details, his chest puffed out. He covered the receiver with his hand and whispered to his parents that this was exactly how successful people operated. You throw enough money at a problem, and it disappears. William nodded approvingly, the color returning to his pale face. Catherine clasped her hands together, already picturing the elegant platters of food that would surely arrive to save them from ruin. On the phone, Julianne spoke again. "Thank you, Mr. Williams. I am locating your file now. I will need to put you on a brief hold while I consult with our Vice President of Operations regarding immediate staff deployment. Please hold the line." The smooth jazz hold music filled the kitchen. Brandon poured himself another glass of sparkling water, entirely oblivious to the gears shifting behind the scenes of the company he was trying to buy his way into. 5,000 miles away, the warm Hawaiian sun was beating down on the pristine white sand of Maui. I was reclining in my private beachfront cabana, the sound of the ocean providing a steady, calming rhythm. My personal phone was turned off, blissfully disconnected from the toxic panic I had left behind in Connecticut. However, my secure corporate phone began to vibrate softly on the small teak table beside my lounge chair. I picked it up and checked the caller ID. It was Marcus, my vice president of operations at Apex Lifestyle. Marcus was a brilliant logistical mastermind who handled the day-to-day chaos of my company so I could focus on expanding my empire. I swiped to answer. "Good morning, Marcus," I said, taking a leisurely sip of my fresh mimosa. "I hope the holiday rush is not giving the dispatch team too much trouble back on the East Coast." "Morning, Fiona," Marcus replied, his voice laced with a mixture of amusement and urgency. "The holiday rush is completely under control, but we just received a highly irregular request that flagged our system. I normally would not bother you while you are preparing for the Caldwell acquisition meetings, but the client name and address matched your personal file. A man named Brandon Williams is requesting an emergency full-staff deployment to a Connecticut estate. He wants a private chef and full catering for 15 VIPs starting in exactly 3 hours. A genuine, effortless laugh escaped my lips. The sheer predictability of my family was almost tragic. They had pushed me away, degraded my career, and demanded my unpaid labor, only to turn around and desperately beg my own company to save them from their incompetence. They thought Apex Lifestyle was just a faceless corporate entity that catered to the elite. They had no idea that I had built this multi-million-dollar firm from scratch entirely without their help and entirely without their knowledge. Marcus continued, unaware of the deep personal history attached to the caller. Julianne in dispatch put him on hold. He is demanding a Wagyu beef dinner and imported truffles. Standard emergency rates would be astronomical, but our system is showing a massive red flag on his profile. What would you like us to do with him? I set my glass down and looked out at the rolling blue waves. My brother was a master of projecting an image of immense wealth, but behind the tailored suits and leased sports cars, he was drowning in debt. I knew this because my financial team ran background checks on anyone attempting to book our premium services. Brandon had tried to use our company once before, 2 years ago, for a flashy yacht party he could not actually afford. He had bounced 2 checks and left a trail of unpaid invoices that I had quietly absorbed to protect the company's bottom line. I had flagged his file personally. "Marcus," I said, my voice dropping an octave into my clinical professional tone. "Do you see the financial notes attached to his client profile?" "Yes," Marcus replied, the clicking of his keyboard audible over the line. "I am looking at it now. Outstanding debts from a previous booking. Multiple declined payment methods. He is officially classified as a high-risk client." "Exactly," I said. "We do not compromise our standards, and we certainly do not dispatch our elite chefs to clients who cannot pay their bills. You are to deny the request immediately." "Understood," Marcus said. "I will have Julianne inform him that we do not have availability due to the holiday schedule." "No," I interrupted smoothly. "Do not blame it on the holiday schedule. He needs to hear the exact reason. Tell Julianne to inform Mr. Williams that his request is denied due to the company blacklist policy regarding clients with outstanding debts and fraudulent payment history." Use those exact words. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Marcus chuckled. "Brutal, but absolutely fair. Consider it done, Fiona. Enjoy the rest of your morning. We will hold the fort down here." I ended the call and leaned back into the plush cushions of my cabana. I closed my eyes and let the ocean breeze wash over me. The trap was set. All I had to do was picture the exact moment the jaws snapped shut. Back in the freezing Connecticut kitchen, Brandon was tapping his foot to the jazz hold music. He looked at his gold watch. The clock was ticking. It was almost 9 in the morning. Mr. Caldwell's junior analysts were scheduled to arrive at exactly 4 o'clock. William and Catherine were pacing the floor, their anxiety radiating through the room. The music abruptly stopped and Julianne's crisp voice returned to the speakerphone. Mr. Williams, thank you so much for your patience. I have consulted with our Vice President of Operations regarding your emergency holiday request. Excellent, Brandon said, puffing his chest out and giving his father a knowing nod. How soon can your chef get here? We need them to start prepping the hors d'oeuvres right away. Mr. Williams, I apologize, but Apex Lifestyle will not be fulfilling your request today or any time in the future, Julianne said. Her tone was no longer accommodating. It was firm, clinical, and completely devoid of warmth. Brandon's smile instantly vanished. What do you mean you will not be fulfilling it? I am offering to pay double your premium emergency rate. I need a chef here today. It is not a matter of scheduling or premium rates? Mr. Williams? Julianne continued, her voice echoing clearly through the silent kitchen. Your request has been permanently denied due to our company blacklist policy. Our financial department has flagged your profile for outstanding debts, previously bounced checks, and a history of fraudulent payment methods associated with your account. We do not dispatch staff to high-risk individuals. We recommend you settle your previous debts before attempting to contact another luxury service. Have a good day. The line went dead with a sharp click. The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Brandon stared at the phone, his mouth slightly open, the blood entirely drained from his face. The polished, successful tech entrepreneur facade crumbled into dust. He looked like a terrified child who had just been caught stealing. William took a slow, menacing step toward his son. Blacklisted William whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and rising fury. Fraudulent payment methods. Brandon, what is she talking about? Brandon swallowed hard, taking a step back until he hit the marble counter. Dad, it is a mistake. It is just a clerical error. These luxury companies, their billing departments are always making mistakes. Do not lie to me, William roared, slamming his fist down on the counter so hard the glass of sparkling water tipped over and shattered on the floor. You told me your company was flush with cash. You told me you were independently wealthy. We just took out a second mortgage on this estate to help bridge your funding gap, and you cannot even pay a catering bill. Catherine gasped, pressing her hands against her cheeks. William, the investors. They are arriving in 3 hours. We have no chef. We have no food. The guest rooms are not even ready. What are we going to do? The reality of their situation descended upon them like a suffocating blanket. The grand estate was freezing because they had turned the heat down to save money on utility bills. The kitchen was completely empty because they had relied entirely on me to stock it and cook. And now the only luxury catering service that could have possibly saved them had publicly humiliated Brandon and exposed his financial ruin. Brandon pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely type. I will call someone else. I will call a local restaurant. I will figure it out. William grabbed Brandon by the collar of his expensive shirt, completely losing his temper. You are going to serve local restaurant takeout to junior analysts representing a billionaire. They will laugh us out of our own home. This pitch is the only thing standing between us and complete bankruptcy, Brandon. You promised me this deal was secure. I will order from the upscale Italian place downtown. Brandon pleaded desperately, trying to salvage the disaster. I will plate it on our good china. They will not know the difference. We just need to keep them fed and happy until the pitch tomorrow morning. Catherine was openly weeping now, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face as she looked around the immaculate, empty kitchen. This is all Fiona's fault, she sobbed completely, ignoring the fact that her golden child was broke. If she had just stayed and done her job, none of this would be happening. She ruined our Christmas. Brandon frantically dialed the local Italian restaurant, praying they were open on Christmas Eve and willing to deliver a massive catering order on zero notice. When the restaurant manager finally answered, he laughed at Brandon's request for a 5-course gourmet meal. The best they could offer was giant aluminum trays of baked, ziti, lukewarm garlic bread and a massive bowl of house salad. Beggars could not be choosers. Brandon was forced to hand over his credit card, praying it would not decline, and order the lowest tier takeout available. The stage was set for an absolute disaster. In 3 hours, 15 highly critical financial analysts were going to walk through the doors of a freezing house expecting luxury and innovation. Instead, they were going to be greeted by a desperate family, the smell of cheap garlic bread, and a house of cards that was rapidly beginning to collapse. And I was going to watch it all burn from paradise. Exactly 3 hours later, the crunch of heavy tires on frozen gravel echoed through the expansive Connecticut estate. The frantic energy inside the house had reached a fever pitch. Brandon was sprinting between the kitchen and the formal dining room, his expensive leather shoes sliding on the hardwood floors as he balanced cheap aluminum trays of food that were rapidly losing whatever heat they had left. Catherine was practically bathing the grand foyer in a heavy floral perfume, desperately attempting to mask the pungent, greasy scent of stale garlic, cheap oregano, and burnt cheese that had settled over the entire first floor. William was engaged in a losing battle with the massive stone fireplace in the living room. For years, I had been the one to properly season the firewood, open the flues, and ensure a warm, crackling fire greeted our winter guests. William, operating on sheer arrogance, had thrown a pile of damp, unseasoned logs onto the grate and tossed in a handful of matches. The result was a thick, acrid cloud of gray smoke that refused to go up the chimney, billowing out into the room and leaving a sharp burning sensation in the back of the throat. Through the grand bay windows, 4 pristine black luxury SUVs pulled up in perfect synchronized formation. 15 men and women stepped out into the biting winter air. These were not the casual hoodie-wearing tech brothers Brandon usually associated with. These were Mr. Caldwell's elite strike team of junior analysts. They were dressed in bespoke wool overcoats, armed with encrypted leather portfolios, and specifically trained by a billionaire to spot critical weaknesses in any business model or individual. At the forefront of the group was David, the lead analyst. He possessed a sharp, calculating, and unforgiving gaze. Before he even reached the top step, his eyes had swept over the unkempt state of the driveway, the complete lack of valet service, and the thin layer of gray smoke visibly seeping from the cracks around the front door. William threw open the heavy oak doors, pasting a wide, painfully artificial smile onto his face. He threw his arms wide, desperate to adopt the persona of a generous old-money patriarch welcoming his peers. "Welcome to the Williams estate," William boomed, his voice immediately followed by a slight cough as a waft of smoke escaped the living room behind him. "Please come in out of the cold." Catherine hovered nervously behind his shoulder, offering to take their coats with trembling hands. David stepped inside his polished shoes, clicking against the floor. He handed Catherine his heavy overcoat, expecting to be directed to a staffed cloakroom. Instead, because there was no coat check organized, Catherine awkwardly began draping 15 heavy, wet winter coats over a delicate antique entryway bench. The bench groaned audibly under the massive weight, threatening to snap. Brandon rushed out from the dining room, desperately smoothing down his tie with sweaty palms. He forced a charismatic, booming laugh that echoed poorly in the smoky hallway. "David, it is great to finally see you in person. We have a fantastic weekend planned for your team. Lots of incredible innovation to discuss." David offered a polite, incredibly firm handshake, his eyes continuously scanning the chaotic background. The temperature inside the house was shockingly low. William had recently turned the central heating down to save on mounting utility bills, assuming the grand fireplaces would warm the rooms for their guests. Now, with the fireplaces smoking and entirely useless, the chill was biting. Several analysts discreetly pulled their suit jackets tighter, their breath nearly visible in the frigid air. Brandon quickly ushered the group into the formal dining room, promising a spectacular feast to warm them up. The analysts gathered around the long antique mahogany table, and the stark reality of Brandon's crisis management skills was laid bare under the crystal chandelier. Instead of the expected silver chafing dishes, fine china, and gourmet cuisine, the beautiful table was lined with cheap bent aluminum trays. Condensation dripped heavily from the plastic wrap, covering mountains of lukewarm baked ziti. A massive, flimsy plastic bowl held wilted iceberg lettuce drowning in generic store-bought Italian dressing. The garlic bread was still wrapped in greasy foil, rapidly turning hard and cold in the drafty room. David stopped at the head of the table, his expression completely neutral, though his sharp eyes missed absolutely nothing. I was under the impression this was to be a fully catered executive retreat. Brandon. David said, his voice quiet, but carrying a distinct weight that made the entire room fall dead silent. Mr. Caldwell places a very high premium on hospitality preparation and attention to detail. William immediately stepped in, his face flushing with a violent mix of embarrassment and defensive anger. Rather than taking accountability, he resorted to his favorite tactic, shifting the blame entirely onto my shoulders. He decided to air his toxic family grievances to a room full of pristine, calculating strangers. "You must excuse the presentation," David William announced loudly, throwing his hands up in a gesture of dramatic patriarchal suffering. My ungrateful, unstable daughter decided to have a massive mental breakdown this morning. She was supposed to manage the catering and the estate maintenance, but she abandoned her family duties out of pure spite just hours before you arrived. Catherine quickly stepped up beside her husband, shaking her head tragically, playing the role of the wounded mother. "We gave that girl absolutely everything," Catherine added, raising her voice to ensure the 15 analysts heard every single word. "We let her live in our basement last year when she had nothing. We supported her financially through a terrible divorce. And she repays our boundless generosity by ruining our high-end holiday catering plans right before you walked through the door. We are victims of her instability and selfishness." David and the other analysts exchanged swift, unreadable glances. In the high-stakes corporate world, airing deeply personal toxic family drama to your potential investors within 5 minutes of arrival was a massive glowing red flag. It demonstrated a profound lack of professional boundaries and emotional intelligence. David looked directly at Brandon, his gaze piercing. "So your sister serves as your director of operations for this venture?" Brandon swallowed hard, visibly sweating through his designer shirt despite the freezing temperature of the room. No, of course not." Brandon stammered desperately, trying to elevate his own status while diminishing mine. "Fiona just plans little low-budget parties. She is a low-level event planner. We actually had Apex Lifestyle booked for today. They are the premier luxury concierge service on the East Coast, but there was a massive clerical error on their end. Their customer service is terrible, frankly. It is completely out of my hands, but we pivoted to local authentic Italian cuisine to save the evening." David looked down at the sweating plastic wrap covering the cold pasta. He looked at the shivering junior analysts standing around the grand table, keeping their arms crossed for warmth. Finally, he looked at Brandon, a man confidently asking for millions of dollars in investment capital, who could not even secure a heated room or coordinate a simple hot meal for his guests. "Thank you for the hospitality," David said politely, taking a seat at the table, but making absolutely no move toward the aluminum trays. "I think I will pass on dinner tonight." As Brandon frantically tried to pivot the conversation back to tech synergies, user acquisition models, and his brilliant software code, David discreetly unclasped his leather portfolio. He pulled out a sleek, heavily encrypted tablet, resting it silently on his lap beneath the mahogany table. With practiced, ruthless efficiency, he opened a direct, secure messaging line to Mr. Caldwell. His fingers flew across the screen, documenting the exact, unvarnished reality of the Williams family dynamic. He noted the freezing house, the chaotic and smoky environment, the greasy takeout, and the blatant lies about Apex Lifestyle. Most importantly, he noted the psychological profile unfolding in front of him. "Brandon Williams lacks fundamental leadership and crisis management skills," David typed into the secure chat. "The estate is in complete disarray." When faced with a minor logistical failure, the CEO immediately resorts to publicly blaming a female family member and airing deeply unprofessional personal grievances to guests. He displays zero accountability and lies about corporate bookings to cover his tracks. "Recommend we proceed with extreme caution. The foundation here is entirely unstable and the leadership is compromised." He hit send, locking the tablet, while Brandon continued to smile and sweat, completely unaware that his empire was crumbling before he even made his pitch. David secured his tablet inside his leather portfolio with a definitive click. That single sound seemed to echo through the dining room, louder than the forced, awkward chatter William was desperately trying to maintain. Brandon stared at the untouched aluminum tray of baked ziti in the center of the table. The greasy cheese had congealed into a solid, unappetizing block. The analysts were visibly shivering their tailored jackets, offering little protection against the drafty chill of the house. Brandon felt the walls closing in. The suffocating smell of cheap garlic bread and marinara sauce was making him nauseous. He needed to escape the judging eyes of the investors. He abruptly stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He muttered a frantic, disjointed excuse about checking the wine cellar for a special vintage to pair with the meal, and practically sprinted out of the dining room. He pushed through the heavy wooden door leading to the garage, slamming it shut behind him. The air in the garage was frigid, smelling faintly of motor oil and the damp cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. Brandon paced furiously between his leased sports car and William's luxury sedan. His chest heaved as he pulled out his phone. He dialed Fiona's number, his thumb jabbing the screen with violent force. He expected her to send him straight to voicemail. He expected her to be cowering wherever she was, waiting for the family's wrath to fall upon her. Instead, the line rang twice before Fiona answered. Her voice was clear, crisp, and completely devoid of the guilt Brandon desperately needed to hear. "Hello, Brandon," Fiona said. The sound of distant rhythmic ocean waves played softly in the background. Brandon exploded. "You ruined my life!" he screamed into the receiver, his voice echoing sharply off the concrete walls of the garage. "You vindictive, psychotic failure. Do you have any idea what is happening in there right now?" Caldwell's lead analyst just refused to eat. "The house is freezing. They are looking at me like I am an absolute joke. This is a multi-million-dollar pitch, and you destroyed it because you threw a pathetic temper tantrum over prepping a few meals." Fiona let him rant. She took a slow sip of her artisan water, leaning against the glass railing of her private balcony in Maui. The warm, tropical breeze was a stark contrast to the freezing rage radiating from her brother's voice. "I did not ruin your life, Brandon," Fiona replied evenly. "I simply stopped subsidizing it with my unpaid labor. If your multi-million-dollar pitch hinges entirely on your sister folding napkins and cooking turkey, then your business model is inherently flawed." Brandon kicked a stray cardboard box across the garage floor, his face contorting with rage. "Do not try to use business terminology with me," he snarled. "You committed a breach of verbal contract. Mom and Dad gave you clear instructions and you agreed to them. You legally committed to providing a service for this estate and you abandoned your post. I could sue you for everything you have. I could drag you into court and absolutely bankrupt you for the financial damages you are causing me tonight." Fiona actually smiles at the sheer absurdity of his threat. A breach of verbal contract for refusing to be his domestic servant. It was the frantic, empty threat of a man who watched too many legal dramas and possessed zero actual power. "You are not suing anyone, Brandon," she said, her tone laced with calm amusement. "Lawsuits require capital, and you cannot even afford a caterer." That hit a nerve. Brandon gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He stopped pacing and leaned heavily against the hood of his leased car. His arrogant bluster suddenly fractured, revealing the raw, frantic desperation underneath. He wiped a bead of cold sweat from his forehead. "Listen to me," Brandon said, his voice dropping to a harsh, ragged whisper. "You are going to fix this. You are going to wire $15,000 to my checking account right now, tonight." Fiona paused, genuinely intrigued by his delusion. $15,000? For what? "I have to save this weekend," Brandon pleaded, though it sounded more like a threat. "I cannot feed these people takeout again tomorrow. I know the general manager at Le Petit Chateau in the city. It is a Michelin star restaurant. They are fully booked for Christmas Day, but 15 grand in cash will bribe them into opening their private dining room for my entire group. It is the only way I can salvage this pitch and prove to David that I operate at a high level. You owe me this money, Fiona. You owe it to me for ruining my catering." The absolute audacity of the demand was staggering. He was standing in a freezing garage serving cheap pasta to billionaires and still possessed the arrogance to demand his sister fund, his luxury bribes. "You want me to wire you $15,000? Fiona clarified, keeping her voice completely neutral so you can bribe a restaurant manager to clean up your mess. "It is the least you can do," Brandon snapped, misinterpreting her calm tone for compliance. "You are going to send the money immediately. If you do not do this, Fiona, I swear to you I will make sure Mom and Dad destroy your life. I will make sure they write you out of the family will forever." He leaned into the threat, feeling a surge of his old superiority return. He always used the family wealth as a weapon against her. "You will be cut off completely. You will not see a single dime of the estate. You will be stuck planning cheap birthday parties and budget weddings for the rest of your miserable life. You think your little party planning gig is going to sustain you when you are old. You are nothing without this family's money. You are a glorified servant who sets tables for a living. If you do not wire that money right now, you are dead to this family. You will have absolutely nothing." Fiona stood on her balcony and looked out at the Pacific Ocean. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. She thought about her corporate accounts, the massive luxury empire she had built from scratch, the 8-figure acquisition deal sitting on the table behind her in the suite. She thought about her brother sweating in a dark garage, desperately trying to extort $15,000 to save a fake company. Fiona threw her head back and laughed. It was not a quiet, polite chuckle. It was a full, resonant, uncontrollable laugh that echoed clearly through the phone line. It was the pure, unadulterated sound of a woman who had finally and completely shattered the chains of her family's toxic control. Brandon pulled the phone away from his ear for a second, deeply unsettled by the sound. "What is so funny?" he demanded, panic rising in his chest again. "I am serious, Fiona. You will be written out of the will. You will get nothing." Fiona's laughter subsided into a sharp, clinical coldness. Her voice dropped, carrying the absolute authority of a woman who held every single card in the deck. "Oh, Brandon," Fiona said smoothly. "You really have absolutely no idea what is going on, do you? You are threatening to write me out of a will that is completely worthless." Brandon froze. The cold air in the garage suddenly felt suffocating. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. "I am not sending you a single cent." Fiona continued, her words precise and lethal. "You can feed Mr. Caldwell's analysts cold garlic bread for all I care. But if I were you, I would stop worrying about my career. You should be vastly more concerned about your own. Specifically, you should worry about the second mortgage Dad took out on the estate just to keep your fake tech company afloat." The silence on the line was absolute. Brandon stopped breathing. The blood rushing in his ears sounded like a freight train. "Did you really think I did not know?" Fiona asked, her voice a soft, dangerous murmur. "Dad leveraged the entire family estate to fund your plagiarized software. He bet the house on you, Brandon, literally. And judging by the fact that you are currently begging your sister for restaurant bribe money, I am guessing your user acquisition numbers are just as fabricated as your business plan." Brandon opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His mind raced frantically, trying to deny her words, but the terrifying truth anchored him to the concrete floor. He knew the software was failing. He knew the numbers he was going to present tomorrow were heavily inflated. But he had no idea Fiona knew about the second mortgage. He had no idea anyone knew. "Have fun with your pitch tomorrow," Fiona said. "I am sure David will be incredibly impressed by your leadership." She ended the call. The dial tone buzzed in Brandon's ear, a harsh, mechanical sound that perfectly matched the sudden, terrifying emptiness in his chest. His blood ran completely cold. The arrogant tech visionary was gone. He was just a terrified fraud standing in the dark, realizing that his sister held the pin to the grenade that was about to destroy his entire world. Brandon stood paralyzed in the freezing garage, the mechanical hum of the disconnected call echoing in his ear. His vision blurred. The realization that his estranged sister knew about the secret second mortgage, the fraudulent software user numbers, and the absolute house of cards he had built left him entirely catatonic. He could not move. He could not breathe. He simply stared at the oil-stained concrete floor, his hands trembling violently. The heavy wooden door connecting the garage to the main house burst open, slamming against the drywall with a loud crack. Catherine stumbled through the doorway, shivering uncontrollably in her thin silk blouse. The scent of acrid fireplace smoke and cheap garlic clung to her clothes, completely overpowering her expensive perfume. She looked frantic, her eyes wide with mounting panic. "Did you get the money?" Catherine demanded, her voice shrill and echoing in the cavernous space. "Brandon, tell me you got the money. David and his team are putting their coats back on. They are refusing to eat that garbage you ordered. William is trying to stall them with scotch, but they are looking at us like we are criminals. Call the restaurant. Tell me you secured the private dining room for tomorrow." Brandon just stared at her, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution. "She knows," Brandon whispered, his voice cracking. "Fiona knows about the second mortgage. She knows everything, Mom. She hung up on me. We are completely dead." Catherine's face contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. Her golden child was falling apart, and the daughter she despised was refusing to fall in line and serve her intended purpose. The sheer audacity of Fiona standing her ground sent Catherine into a blind, desperate fury. She snatched the phone from Brandon's limp hand. She stared at the screen, hit redial, and pressed the device to her ear, marching back and forth across the freezing garage. On my balcony in Maui, my secure corporate phone began to vibrate once again. I looked down at the glowing screen, shaking my head with a genuine smile of amusement. I tapped the green button, but before bringing the phone to my ear, I swiftly activated the call recording software built into my operating system. Catherine did not even pause to breathe when the line connected. She launched into a vicious, full-volume tirade. "You vindictive, psychotic little brat!" Catherine screamed, the venom dripping from every syllable. "How dare you hang up on your brother? How dare you abandon this family in our hour of need? You are going to wire that $15,000 to Brandon this exact second, or I swear to God I will destroy whatever pathetic little life you have scraped together. I will ruin your reputation. I will make sure you never work in event planning again." I listened to her unhinged screaming, feeling the warm Hawaiian breeze gently rustling my hair. I took a slow sip of my mimosa. "Yelling at me from a cold garage is not going to change your reality, Mother," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "David and his team are currently sitting in your dining room staring at cold-baked ziti, writing an evaluation report that will bankrupt Brandon by tomorrow morning. No amount of screaming is going to alter the fact that you are entirely incompetent." Catherine lost whatever shred of sanity she had left. She could not comprehend that her traditional weapons of guilt, shame, and familial obligation were bouncing off me completely. She needed to wound me. She needed to put me back in the tiny, subservient box they had built for me since childhood. She resorted to the most devastating psychological ammunition she possessed. She decided to break my spirit by reminding me exactly what I was worth to them. "You think you are so smart?" Catherine sneered, her voice dropping into a cruel, triumphant tone. "You think your little party planning gig makes you an equal to Brandon? You are nothing, Fiona. You are a glorified maid. You pick up dirty plates and fold napkins for a living while your brother builds the future. We never cared about your ridiculous ambitions because you do not matter." She took a sharp breath, preparing to deliver the ultimate blow. She wanted to prove how little I mattered, to crush me so thoroughly that I would submit and send the money just to earn a scrap of their approval. "We never expected anything from you," Catherine spat, enunciating every single word to ensure maximum emotional damage. "That is why we emptied your college savings to pay for Brandon's first business. You were always just meant to support him." I stopped breathing. The ocean waves crashing against the shore seemed to suddenly mute themselves. Catherine laughed, a harsh, grating sound of pure malice. She was enjoying this. She was reveling in the pain she believed she was inflicting. "Oh, you did not know that, did you? You thought the market crashed. You thought the investments your grandparents set up for you just disappeared. No, Fiona. William and I forged your signature on the release forms the week after you turned 18. We drained every single penny from your trust fund. $300,000. We took your money and we gave it to Brandon so he could launch his first startup. The silence on the line stretched as Catherine continued her vicious confession. She detailed exactly how they had done it. She mocked the memory of my struggles. "You were always such a naive, pathetic little girl," Catherine mocked, her voice echoing in the cold Connecticut garage. "I remember watching you cry at the kitchen table filling out student loan applications. I remember you working the graveyard shift at that filthy diner, exhausting yourself studying until your eyes bled because you thought we had no money to help you. William and I sat in the living room laughing at you. We watched you suffer and we did not care because your only purpose on this earth was to be a stepping stone for your brother. Brandon is a visionary. You are just a workhorse. Your money belonged to him. It was always his money." The absolute cruelty of her words hung in the air. All those years of financial terror, the crushing weight of student debt, the nights I went hungry in a cramped dorm room because I could not afford basic groceries. They had not just abandoned me financially when I needed them most. They had actively stolen my future, committed massive financial fraud, and subjected me to years of poverty just to fund Brandon's inflated ego. They had watched me break my back to survive, knowing they had stolen my safety net. Catherine breathed heavily into the phone, waiting for the sound of my devastation. She waited for the familiar sound of my crying, for the apologies, for the total submission she had always extracted from me after a brutal verbal beating. She expected me to beg for their love, to offer the $15,000 just to prove I was still a loyal member of the family. I stood completely still on my balcony. I looked down at the recording app running seamlessly in the background of my corporate phone. The bright red timer ticked upward, capturing every single word of her unprompted, legally binding confession to felony wire fraud and grand larceny. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not offer a single word of defense, justification, or anger. I took a slow, deep breath of the sweet tropical air. A cold, absolute calm settled into my bones, replacing decades of residual trauma and childhood fear. I was no longer the scared college student begging for scraps of affection. I was a multimillionaire CEO holding the detonator to their entire existence. "Thank you for finally admitting that on a recorded line," I said. I tapped the red button to end the call and immediately forwarded the encrypted audio file directly to my lead corporate attorney. Back in the freezing garage, Catherine stood frozen with the phone pressed to her ear. The dial tone buzzed loudly, a harsh mechanical sound that pierced the silence of the room. Her triumphant sneer slowly melted away, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. The echo of my final sentence played over and over in her mind. On a recorded line, she slowly lowered the phone, her hands shaking violently. She looked at Brandon, who was staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. He had heard every word on speakerphone. They both realized simultaneously that in her desperate attempt to inflict emotional damage, Catherine had just freely confessed to a massive financial crime. She had just handed the daughter she despised the exact legal ammunition needed to send both her and William to federal prison. Catherine dropped the phone. It shattered against the concrete floor, but the damage was already permanently done. The sharp crack of the phone shattering against the concrete floor echoed through the freezing garage, followed by a profound and suffocating silence. Catherine stared down at the broken pieces of plastic and glass, her chest heaving. The manic energy that had fueled her vicious tirade evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, paralyzing terror. She had just handed Fiona the loaded gun. In her desperate, arrogant need to inflict emotional pain, she had explicitly confessed to felony wire fraud and grand larceny on a recorded line. Brandon stood perfectly still, his breath forming small white clouds in the frigid air. His mind was struggling to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. The threat of federal prison loomed over his mother, but Brandon's selfish, panicked brain immediately latched onto the other piece of information Fiona had dropped. It was the piece of information that threatened his entire identity, his carefully curated image of the brilliant self-made tech visionary. "A second mortgage?" Brandon whispered, his voice trembling. He took a step toward his mother, his expensive leather shoes crunching over the shards of her broken phone. What did she mean by a second mortgage, Mom? Catherine could not look at him. She wrapped her arms around her thin silk blouse, shivering violently. Her eyes darted around the garage as if searching for an escape route that did not exist. "I need to find your father," she muttered, her voice entirely devoid of its usual haughty command. "We need to call our lawyers. We need to figure out how to handle Fiona." Brandon reached out and grabbed her arm, his grip tight and desperate. "Forget about Fiona for 1 second," he hissed, his voice rising in panic. "What second mortgage? You told me the initial seed funding for my company came from a liquidated family trust. You told me it was surplus capital. Did Dad leverage the estate?" Catherine ripped her arm away, her face twisting into a mask of defensive fury. "Do not use that tone with me, Brandon. We did what we had to do to support you. We gave you everything. Now go back inside and entertain those analysts before we lose everything." She turned and fled back into the house, slamming the heavy wooden door behind her. Brandon stood alone in the dark for a few seconds, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The narrative of his life was unraveling at breakneck speed. He pushed through the door and stormed down the back hallway, bypassing the formal dining room, where the 15 freezing analysts sat in stony silence. He found his father pacing frantically in the butler's pantry, nursing a glass of scotch and muttering under his breath. "Dad," Brandon demanded, stepping into the cramped space and shutting the door behind him. "Tell me the truth right now. Did you take out a second mortgage on this house to fund my company?" William stopped pacing. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his scotch, the amber liquid trembling in the crystal glass. He looked at his son, the golden boy he had sacrificed his own daughter to elevate, and the facade finally broke. The pompous, wealthy patriarch vanished, leaving behind a tired, terrified old man drowning in a sea of toxic debt. "Keep your voice down," William hissed, gesturing wildly toward the door that led to the dining room corridor. "Those people are sitting right out there. If they hear you, the deal is dead." "I do not care about the volume of my voice," Brandon snapped, stepping closer, his eyes wide with a manic intensity. "I care about my company. I care about my pitch. You told me we were fine. You told me the family was flush with cash. Fiona just laughed at me. She said you bet the house on my software. Tell me she is lying. Tell me she is just being a vindictive psycho." William set his glass down on the counter with a heavy thud. "She is not lying, Brandon. We have absolutely nothing left." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Brandon felt the blood drain entirely from his face. "What do you mean we have nothing left? We live in a $10 million estate. You drive a luxury sedan. Mom wears designer clothes every single day." "It is all a mirage," William whispered harshly, leaning in close so his voice would not carry. "It is all credit cards, heavily leveraged assets, and loans we can no longer service. We have been living beyond our means for a decade, trying to keep up appearances at the country club. When you needed capital for your tech startup, the banks laughed at us. They told me I was overextended. We emptied Fiona's college fund because it was the only liquid cash we could access without triggering an audit. When you blew through that money in 6 months on leased office space and fancy marketing, I had to take out a second mortgage on this estate just to keep your servers running." Brandon stumbled backward until his shoulders hit the pantry wall. "You lied to me. You told me I was brilliant. You told me I was a good investment." "You are my son," William fired back, his voice thick with desperate justification. "I needed you to be a brilliant investment. I needed you to build a unicorn. Do you understand our reality right now, Brandon? We are functionally bankrupt. We are 2 missed payments away from immediate foreclosure. The bank is going to take this house, the cars, everything." William grabbed Brandon by the shoulders, shaking him slightly. "That is why this weekend has to be flawless. That is why you have to secure Caldwell's investment tomorrow morning. If you do not walk away with a signed term sheet, we are out on the street. Your fake company is the only thing standing between this family and absolute ruin. You have to sell them on the vision. You have to make them believe the software works." Brandon felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The software did not work. The user acquisition numbers he had printed in the glossy pitch deck sitting in the living room were completely fabricated. He had planned to use the lavish, luxurious setting of the estate, the gourmet food, and the aura of old money to distract the analysts from looking too closely at the actual code. Now the house was freezing, the food was cheap takeout, and his father had just admitted they were broke. The entire foundation of his pitch was built on quicksand. Just outside the thin wooden door of the butler's pantry, the shadowy hallway was quiet. David, the lead analyst for Mr. Caldwell, stood perfectly still in the dim light. He had excused himself from the miserable dining room under the pretense of making a private phone call. In reality, his elite training dictated that he observe the environment when the hosts believed they were unmonitored. He had walked softly down the corridor, intending to inspect the kitchen layout, only to stop dead in his tracks when he heard the frantic, elevated whispers bleeding through the pantry door. David listened with the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon. He heard every single word of William's desperate confession. He heard the admission of functional bankruptcy. He heard the revelation regarding the second mortgage and the stolen college funds. Most crucially, he heard the explicit confirmation that Brandon's tech startup was not an innovative passion project, but rather a desperate last-ditch bailout mechanism designed to save his parents from foreclosure. David did not gasp. He did not change his expression. He simply pulled his encrypted tablet from the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. The glow of the screen illuminated his sharp features in the dark hallway. He opened the secure messaging application that connected directly to his billionaire employer. His thumbs moved across the digital keyboard with practiced silent speed. He typed a highly detailed, meticulous update. He outlined the severe financial instability of the Williams family. He documented the father's admission of deep insolvency and the impending threat of foreclosure. He noted that the CEO of the target company was entirely unaware of his own financial backing until moments ago, indicating a catastrophic lack of due diligence and basic business acumen. Target company is a confirmed front for personal debt relief, David typed, ensuring his assessment was ruthlessly objective. The founder's claims of independent wealth and robust operational stability are entirely fraudulent. The family estate is heavily leveraged. The lavish lifestyle is a facade maintained by credit. The unorganized arrival, the lack of heating, and the low-tier catering are direct results of severe cash flow issues, not scheduling errors. Leadership is currently experiencing a panic event in the pantry. Suggest immediate termination of acquisition interest. David hit send. He stood in the quiet hallway, the faint smell of burnt fireplace wood and cheap marinara sauce assaulting his senses. He waited. He knew Mr. Caldwell rarely slept and monitored his analyst's field reports with obsessive attention. Less than 30 seconds later, the tablet vibrated silently in David's palm. A single encrypted message appeared on the screen. It was from Caldwell. David read the message twice, a slow, predatory smirk touching the corners of his mouth. The billionaire did not order an immediate extraction. He did not tell his team to pack their bags and leave the freezing house. Caldwell was a man who appreciated the mechanics of human desperation. He enjoyed watching a spectacular failure just as much as he enjoyed a profitable acquisition. The message on the screen was brief and utterly devoid of mercy. Let them proceed with the Christmas morning pitch. I want to see how far the lie goes. David locked the tablet and slipped it smoothly back into his interior pocket. He adjusted his silk tie, smoothing the lapels of his suit jacket. He took a moment to compose his features, erasing any trace of the devastating knowledge he now possessed. He turned away from the pantry door, leaving William and Brandon to their frantic, whispering panic. He walked back down the smoky hallway toward the dining room, ready to take his seat at the table. He was fully prepared to play the role of the attentive, interested investor. He would eat the cold-baked ziti if he had to. He would smile and nod and let Brandon Williams dig his own grave lie by pathetic lie until the trap finally snapped shut on Christmas morning. The phone lay in pieces on the concrete floor. The silence in the garage was absolute, broken only by the ragged, panicked breathing of a mother and son who finally understood they had trapped themselves. They were utterly destroyed entirely by their own arrogance. 5,000 miles away, the atmosphere could not have been more different. The tropical sun reflected brilliantly off the Pacific Ocean, casting a warm golden glow across the manicured lawns of the Grand Wailea Resort. I stood in the marble foyer of my private penthouse suite, smoothing the lapels of my tailored white Armani blazer. I checked my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. I looked powerful. I looked like a woman who had built an empire from the ground up entirely free from the toxic weight of her family. This was not a vacation. This was the culmination of 5 years of relentless grinding work. My event planning gig, as my mother so delightfully called it, had evolved into Apex Lifestyle, the premier luxury concierge and corporate retreat firm on the West Coast. We handled logistics acquisitions and exclusive networking events for the top 1% of the tech and finance sectors. Today was the final day of our annual Apex Summit, a highly curated gathering of billionaires, venture capitalists, and industry titans. I stepped out of the suite and walked down the open-air corridor toward the resort's executive business center. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished stone, a sound of pure authority. I pushed open the double oak doors leading into the panoramic boardroom. The space was breathtaking. Glass walls on 3 sides offered an uninterrupted view of the ocean. A massive mahogany table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by ergonomic leather chairs. My executive team was already seated reviewing the finalized term sheets for the upcoming acquisition. My attention immediately went to the man sitting at the head of the table. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with sharp, calculating eyes and a demeanor that commanded absolute respect. He wore a crisp, dark navy suit without a tie, perfectly blending casual island attire with ruthless corporate power. It was Arthur Caldwell. Yes, the very same Arthur Caldwell, whose entry-level analysts were currently freezing in my parents' drafty dining room, refusing to eat cold-baked ziti. My brother Brandon had spent the last 6 months practically begging Caldwell's investment firm for a lifeline. Brandon thought he had secured a meeting with the man himself. He had built his entire Christmas pitch around the delusion that Arthur Caldwell would personally fly to Connecticut to bless his fraudulent software company. Instead, Caldwell had sent a team of junior associates to Connecticut simply to conduct a routine low-priority audit. The billionaire had reserved his own time, his private jet, and his personal attention for the true asset. He had flown to Maui specifically to meet with me. Caldwell's primary holding company had been trying to acquire Apex Lifestyle for the past 8 months. Today, we were finalizing a $90 million buyout that would leave me as the autonomous CEO while providing my firm with unlimited global backing. "Good afternoon, Fiona Caldwell," said his voice, a rich, resonant baritone that instantly quieted the room. "You handle a crisis with remarkable efficiency. I assume the sudden phone call did not derail our schedule." "Not at all." "Arthur," I replied smoothly, taking the seat to his immediate right. "Just a minor, irrelevant distraction from the past. I assure you my focus is entirely on the future of Apex Lifestyle." The meeting commenced with a rigorous review of the final acquisition documents. My legal team presented the projected growth margins for the next 4 quarters. Caldwell's financial officers nodded in approval as we demonstrated our flawless client retention rate and our unparalleled access to elite global venues. We were not just planning parties. We were architecting exclusive environments where multi-billion-dollar deals were struck. We handled the non-disclosure agreements, the private aviation logistics, and the security details for the most powerful people on Earth. We were the silent, indispensable facilitators of the global elite. Caldwell leaned forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany table. He looked at the projected revenue charts my chief financial officer had just displayed on the digital screen. "You know why I am paying $90 million for this operation?" Fiona Caldwell asked, his sharp eyes locking onto mine. "It is not just your client list. Although your database is undeniably impressive, it is not just your profit margins, which are exceptionally healthy for a company entirely bootstrapped by a single founder." I kept my expression neutral, projecting calm confidence. "I am listening, Arthur." "I am buying this company because of you," Caldwell stated flatly. "I have spent 40 years in venture capital and private equity. I deal with hundreds of founders every single year. Most of them are exactly the same. They are soft, entitled legacy children who took their parents' money, attended the right business schools, and learned how to use corporate buzzwords to mask their total lack of actual substance. They want to be chief executives because they want the title, not because they want to do the work. They are terrified of failure, so they build elaborate illusions of success. I know the type intimately, I said, a subtle smile playing on my lips. But you, Fiona Caldwell said, pointing a gold pen in my direction. You are a street fighter. You built this operation without a safety net. You started by managing logistics for mid-tier corporate retreats, handling the unglamorous details nobody else wanted to touch. You scaled this business through sheer competence and relentless execution. You do not panic. You do not make excuses. You deliver reality. That is a vanishingly rare commodity in my world. I am acquiring Apex Lifestyle because I want your operational mindset integrated into my broader portfolio. The validation was profound. It washed over me completely, neutralizing the decades of insults and belittlement I had endured from Catherine and William. They had called me a workhorse. They had mocked my lack of a fancy title. They had actively stolen my financial foundation to fund a man who possessed every single negative trait Caldwell had just listed. Yet here I was being handed a $90 million valuation by one of the most ruthless investors on the planet, precisely because of the work ethic my family had so deeply despised. Let us finalize the paperwork, I said, signaling my lead attorney. The heavy leather binders were pushed to the center of the table. For the next 30 minutes, the room was silent except for the crisp sound of flipping pages and the scratch of fountain pens against high-grade paper. I signed my name repeatedly, authorizing the transfer of equity, solidifying my ongoing role as CEO, and officially executing the most lucrative deal of my life. When the final signature was placed, a collective breath was released in the boardroom. Caldwell smiled genuinely and extended his hand. Welcome to the portfolio, Fiona. I anticipate we are going to make a staggering amount of money together. I shook his hand firmly. The transaction is complete. The relief was intoxicating. I signaled for the catering staff waiting discreetly in the antechamber. They entered silently, carrying silver trays bearing crystal flutes and vintage champagne. As the executives mingled and celebrated the closing of the deal, Caldwell stepped away from the main group and walked over to the glass wall overlooking the ocean. I grabbed 2 flutes of champagne and joined him, handing him a glass. He took a sip, staring out at the waves crashing against the pristine Hawaiian beach. It is a beautiful view, Caldwell noted, his tone relaxing now that the business was concluded. Much better than the alternative. I was supposed to be in Connecticut this weekend. Oh, I asked, taking a sip of my own drink. Did you have family obligations on the East Coast? No business, Caldwell scoffed, shaking his head. Or at least an attempt at business. We have been evaluating a mid-tier software startup for the past few months. The founder has been relentlessly, aggressively pursuing a meeting with me. He promised a revolutionary algorithm, guaranteed user acquisition metrics, the usual desperate promises. He invited me to his family estate for a massive, supposedly exclusive Christmas pitch. He wanted to show me how stable and established his operation was. I took another slow sip of champagne, feeling my heart rate accelerate slightly. I kept my face an absolute mask of polite professional curiosity. That sounds like quite a production, I noted smoothly. It is a circus! Caldwell laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. I almost never attend these things personally unless the metrics are completely verified by my team first. I smelled a rat early on. The founder's financial disclosures were too clean, too vague. So instead of flying out there myself and wasting my holiday, I sent David and a team of junior analysts to conduct a surprise field audit disguised as attendance at this grand dinner party. And what did David find? I asked, leaning slightly against the glass window, my eyes fixed on Caldwell's face. Caldwell chuckled, pulling out his secure encrypted tablet. Exactly what I expected, but significantly more pathetic. David has been messaging me updates for the last hour. The founder is a delusional, failing tech bro. The entire company is a house of cards. They have 0 actual users. The software is basically plagiarized wireframes, and the supposedly wealthy family estate is practically in foreclosure. Caldwell tapped the screen of his tablet, pulling up the message he had just received. Listen to this update David just sent me. The family is in full panic mode. The analysts overheard a massive fight in the hallway. The father just admitted that they took out a secret second mortgage to fund the fake company. They are functionally bankrupt. The entire dinner party was a desperate front to trick us into bailing out the parents' toxic debt. They are serving cheap takeout pasta in a freezing house because they cannot even afford to turn on the heat. The sheer poetic perfection of the universe almost made me laugh out loud. I pictured Brandon sweating in his tailored suit, serving cold-baked ziti to a team of ruthless financial auditors who already knew he was a complete fraud. I pictured Catherine and William, their precious country club facade, crumbling into dust, realizing their golden boy had destroyed them completely. It sounds like David should pack up his team and leave them to their misery, I suggested mildly. Caldwell smiled, a cold, predatory gleam in his eyes. He locked his tablet and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Absolutely not. I just texted David my orders. I told him to stay. I told him to let them proceed with the entire grand Christmas morning pitch. I want David to sit there, drink their cheap wine, and let this pathetic fraud present his entire fake business plan. I want to see exactly how far the lie goes before we drop the hammer and call the fraud authorities. Caldwell turned back to look at the ocean, taking another sip of his champagne. People like that fascinate me, Fiona. They are so consumed by their own arrogance, so desperate to appear important, that they will literally bankrupt their own family rather than admit they are a failure. It is a spectacular psychological defect. I looked at Arthur Caldwell, my new $90 million business partner, and offered him a slow, brilliant, utterly genuine smile. I raised my crystal flute to clink lightly against his. "You have no idea, Arthur," I said softly. "You have absolutely no idea." 5,000 miles away from the warm Hawaiian sunset, the Connecticut estate was plunging into a bitter, unforgiving Christmas Eve night. The sprawling colonial house, usually a beacon of neighborhood envy, sat mostly dark to conserve the dwindling electricity. Inside the formal library, the temperature had dropped so low that the analysts were wearing their cashmere overcoats indoors. The grand stone fireplace remained empty and cold, mirroring the atmosphere in the room. David stood behind a heavy oak desk, his arms crossed over his chest, watching his team dismantle Brandon Williams' entire life work. The three junior analysts were clustered around glowing laptops, their fingers flying rapidly across keyboards. They were conducting a deep dive into the back-end architecture of Brandon's supposedly revolutionary software platform. It did not take a team of elite financial auditors long to find the rot. In fact, the sheer lack of sophistication in the fraud was almost insulting to their intelligence. "Sir, you need to look at this," a junior analyst named Sarah said, breaking the heavy silence. She turned her laptop screen toward David. David leaned over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the lines of code. He adjusted his glasses, his expression hardening into a mask of pure professional disdain. "It is a complete rip-off," Sarah explained, keeping her voice low and clinical. "The core algorithm he has been pitching as proprietary machine learning is literally just an open-source script pulled directly from a public developer forum. He did not even bother to remove the original creator's copyright tags in the back-end comments. He just changed the color scheme of the user interface and slapped his company logo on the dashboard. The entire software architecture took maybe 4 hours to assemble. It is completely useless." David did not look surprised. "Run the user acquisition database," he commanded smoothly. "He claims they have 60,000 active daily users driving organic growth." Another analyst, a young man named Marcus, typed a quick command into his terminal. He shook his head, letting out a quiet scoff of disbelief. "The user numbers are fabricated. Mr. Caldwell, it is not even a sophisticated fake. He is running a basic automated loop script that generates sequential dummy profiles. The user list is literally just variations of test accounts with sequential numbers attached to fake email addresses. User 1 user. 2. User 3. There is no real traffic. The server logs show 0 actual human interaction for the past 4 months. The entire company is a ghost town." David straightened his posture, buttoning his suit jacket. The picture was complete. The software was plagiarized. The user base was a digital hallucination. The company was nothing more than an empty shell constructed for the sole purpose of extorting venture capital to bail out William and Catherine from their disastrous second mortgage. It was a pathetic, desperate scam executed by a man who possessed neither the intellect to build a real product nor the cunning to properly fake one. Before David could issue his next directive to the team, the heavy mahogany doors of the library creaked open. Brandon stepped into the room wearing a forced, wide smile that stretched his facial features into a painful grimace. He was sweating profusely despite the freezing temperature of the room. In his trembling hands, he carried a silver tray holding 4 crystal tumblers and an unopened bottle of Macallan, 25-year-old single malt scotch. It was a bottle that retailed for thousands of dollars, a bottle William had undoubtedly purchased on a maxed-out credit card just for this occasion. Gentleman and Lady Brandon announced, his voice overly loud and entirely too cheerful for the grim setting. I know you are all working incredibly hard on Christmas Eve. I thought we could take a quick break. Celebrate the holidays, build some synergy. This is a very special vintage from my father's private reserve. Brandon walked toward the oak desk, his eyes darting nervously around the room, trying to gauge the analyst's expressions. He desperately needed to charm them. He needed to project the image of a relaxed, successful tech founder, bonding with his future financial partners. He set the silver tray down on the edge of the desk and reached for the bottle, his hands shaking so badly the glass clinked loudly against the crystal tumblers. I was thinking we could talk about the scaling opportunities in the third quarter. Brandon continued rambling as he struggled with the cork. Once the capital injection hits our accounts, we are poised for aggressive market dominance. David stepped forward. He reached out and placed his hand firmly over the top of the scotch bottle, stopping Brandon cold. The physical contact was slight, but the absolute authority in David's movement froze Brandon in place. We are not drinking, Mr. Williams, David said, his voice dropping to a glacial, uncompromising register. And we are not taking a break. We are concluding the technical phase of our audit. Brandon swallowed hard, a bead of cold sweat rolling down his temple. Right, of course, he stammered, pulling his hands back from the tray as if it had burned him. I respect the grind, always hustle. So how are the numbers looking? You guys seeing the massive engagement potential? David stared at him. He did not blink. He looked at Brandon the way a scientist observes a particularly unimpressive specimen under a microscope. The numbers are highly illuminating, David replied, his tone perfectly flat. They provide a very clear picture of your operations. However, I am not authorized to discuss preliminary findings with you. Brandon tried to maintain his fake smile, but his lower lip twitched. Well, when do we talk next steps? David, I really need to know where we stand before the holiday weekend is over. My board of directors is pushing for a resolution. There is no board of directors, David knew, but he did not break character. You will have your resolution tomorrow morning, David stated, stepping back and clasping his hands behind his back. Mr. Caldwell has reviewed our initial field reports. He has requested a final comprehensive presentation of your business model, your financial health, and your software capabilities. He will be joining us via secure video link tomorrow at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. He expects a flawless pitch, Mr. Williams. Following your presentation, he will deliver his final verdict on the investment. Brandon felt the air leave his lungs. Arthur Caldwell himself was going to be on the screen. The billionaire was going to personally scrutinize him. The sheer terror of facing the titan of industry made Brandon's knees weak, but his delusional arrogance quickly grabbed hold of the fear and twisted it into false hope. This was it. Caldwell was paying attention. Caldwell wanted a show. If he could just talk fast enough, if he could use enough buzzwords and project enough fake wealth, he could still pull this off. He could save the house. He could save his ego. Absolutely, Brandon said, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat to lower the pitch. 9 o'clock sharp. We will be ready. You will not be disappointed. David offered a tight, utterly humorless smile. I am sure we will see exactly what you are capable of, Mr. Williams. Now please excuse us. We have a considerable amount of data left to process. Brandon practically sprinted out of the library, leaving the expensive scotch untouched on the desk. He raced down the hallway, taking the stairs two at a time, nearly tripping over his own expensive leather shoes. He burst into the master suite, where Catherine and William were sitting in tense silence. Catherine was aggressively chewing on a manicured fingernail, while William stared blankly at a stack of overdue utility bills spread across the comforter. "They are doing it!" Brandon gasped, leaning heavily against the doorframe, trying to catch his breath. "Caldwell is calling in tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. He wants the final pitch. He wants to see the presentation." William stood up, his face pale. Caldwell himself. "Yes," Brandon practically shouted, pacing the room with frantic manic energy. "This is our shot. They are biting. The analysts must have liked what they saw in the back end. They want to seal the deal on Christmas morning. It is a power move. It is classic venture capital posturing." Catherine immediately stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her silk trousers, her eyes wide with a renewed desperate delusion. "We have to be ready," Catherine commanded, her voice shrill and urgent. "We have to make this house look like a place where billionaires do business. We cannot let them see the truth. William, you need to go down to the basement and bring up the space heaters. We will hide them behind the curtains in the living room so the room is warm but they cannot see the cheap plastic." The next 12 hours descended into a state of absolute unhinged madness. While the rest of the world slept preparing for a peaceful Christmas morning, the Williams family tore their own house apart in a frantic attempt to build a theatrical set of fake success. Brandon dragged a massive, heavy whiteboard up from the basement and positioned it in the center of the formal living room. He spent 3 hours drawing complex, utterly meaningless graphs using colorful dry erase markers. He drew upward trending arrows, jotted down fake user acquisition metrics, and wrote nonsensical coding algorithms in the margins to make it look like a hub of late-night genius innovation. He scattered empty coffee cups and thick stacks of printed paper across the coffee table to simulate a relentless, successful work environment. William exhausted himself dragging heavy rugs over the areas of the hardwood floor that had buckled from a neglected water leak. He meticulously adjusted the dimmer switches on the antique chandeliers, keeping the lighting purposefully low to hide the peeling paint on the ceiling and the lack of proper holiday decorations. He arranged expensive art books on the side tables, trying to project an aura of established intellectual wealth. Catherine scrubbed the baseboards on her hands and knees until her fingers bled. She arranged the remaining cheap pastries on a silver platter, trying to make the discount bakery food look like a curated artisanal breakfast spread. She changed her outfit 3 times, finally settling on a severe high-collared designer dress that made her look like a wealthy, unbothered matriarch. As the sun began to rise over the frosted Connecticut landscape, painting the sky in pale shades of winter gray, the 3 of them stood in the center of the staged living room. They were exhausted, sweating, and running entirely on pure adrenaline and absolute delusion. They looked at the fake charts, the hidden heaters, and the perfectly angled chairs, positioned in front of the massive television screen, where Caldwell's face would soon appear. They looked at each other, nodding in silent agreement. They believed they had done it. They actually believed their amateur theatrics and plagiarized code were going to fool a team of elite financial assassins. They believed their toxic, bankrupt reality was safely hidden behind a veneer of desperate staging. They stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the clock to strike 9 completely, and blissfully unaware that they were stepping directly into a perfectly constructed trap, and that the woman holding the remote control on the other side of the country was the very daughter they had thrown away. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 9 times, each heavy strike echoing like a judge's gavel through the freezing Connecticut mansion. Outside, a pristine layer of fresh Christmas snow blanketed the estate, painting a picture of idyllic holiday perfection. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with a suffocating metallic tension that tasted like copper and sheer desperation. Brandon stood in the center of the staged formal living room, shifting his weight from one expensive Italian loafer to the other. He wore a bespoke navy suit that felt 2 sizes too tight against his racing pulse. A single bead of cold sweat carved a path down the back of his neck, soaking into his starched white collar. He wiped his damp palms against his trousers, trying to steady his violent tremors. Seated on the vintage velvet sofa directly behind him were William and Catherine. They looked like wax figures in a museum of fraudulent wealth. Catherine had applied a heavy layer of foundation to mask the dark, bruised circles of absolute terror under her eyes. She sat perfectly rigid, her spine straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her knuckles were bone white. William sat beside her with his legs crossed, projecting an aura of relaxed, aristocratic confidence that was entirely betrayed by the rapid, erratic tapping of his right foot. They had spent the entire night constructing this lie. The space heaters hidden behind the heavy silk drapes were working overtime, pumping dry, artificial heat into the massive room. The air smelled faintly of burning dust and ozone. The coffee table was meticulously arranged with fake financial printouts, empty espresso cups, and Brandon's glossy plagiarized pitch decks. It was a masterpiece of desperate theatrical staging. David, the lead analyst, stood by the massive flat-screen television mounted above the stone fireplace. He moved with the quiet, terrifying efficiency of an executioner preparing the gallows. His two junior associates stood silently near the doorway, their faces impassive, their eyes locked on the digital displays of their tablets. They knew the truth. They knew the code was stolen. They knew the user numbers were generated by a dummy script. They knew the family sitting before them was functionally bankrupt and drowning in a secret second mortgage. Yet they betrayed absolutely nothing. David connected a thick black cable from his sleek laptop to the television. The screen flashed blue, casting a harsh synthetic glow across Brandon's pale face. "We are initializing the secure connection now, Mr. Williams," David stated, his voice devoid of any festive warmth. "Mr. Caldwell is on the line. He expects a concise, high-level overview of your user acquisition metrics and your proprietary algorithm." Brandon nodded frantically, flashing a manic wide smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. "Absolutely, David. We are ready. The numbers speak for themselves. We are looking at a paradigm shift in digital engagement." David did not respond to the pathetic display of corporate jargon. He simply tapped a single key on his laptop. A sharp, digital ringing tone pierced the silence of the room. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring caused Catherine to flinch slightly, her meticulously manicured nails digging deep into the velvet fabric of the sofa. William cleared his throat, a dry, nervous sound that echoed loudly. Brandon took a deep breath, forcing his shoulders back. He puffed out his chest, channeling every ounce of his unearned arrogance. He was Brandon Williams, the tech visionary, the golden child, the savior of the family estate. He just needed to talk fast. He just needed to dazzle the old billionaire with his charisma. The screen flickered, dropping the blue hue and replacing it with a high-definition video feed. The image was startlingly bright. Instead of a dark, wintry office, the screen displayed a magnificent, sun-drenched boardroom. Through the massive glass walls behind the conference table, Brandon could see brilliant turquoise ocean waves crashing against a pristine tropical beach. The lighting was vibrant, casting a warm, golden glow over the expensive mahogany furniture. Sitting directly in the center of the frame, looking relaxed and immensely powerful, was Arthur Caldwell. He wore a crisp white linen shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, projecting the effortless authority of a man who owned everything he surveyed. Brandon immediately stepped forward, planting his feet firmly in the center of the Persian rug. He locked his eyes on the camera lens, unleashing his most polished, aggressive, and charismatic smile. "Mr. Caldwell, Merry Christmas!" Brandon declared, his voice booming with forced enthusiasm. "I am honored to." Brandon's voice died in his throat. The words simply evaporated. On the massive television screen, the camera angle slowly widened, panning out to reveal the rest of the luxurious Hawaiian boardroom. The frame expanded to include the high-backed leather executive chair positioned immediately to Arthur Caldwell's right. Sitting in that chair, bathed in the tropical sunlight, was Fiona. She was wearing a razor-sharp designer ivory suit that radiated absolute power and control. Her hair was perfectly styled, catching the light from the glass walls. In her right hand, she casually held a crystal flute of champagne. She looked directly into the camera lens, her eyes locking onto Brandon's terrified face across 5,000 miles of digital connection. She did not look angry. She did not look vindictive. She looked entirely and utterly bored. Brandon stopped breathing. His jaw went slack, his mouth hanging open in a grotesque display of total shock. The carefully rehearsed corporate buzzwords, the lies about user acquisition, the fraudulent pitch he had stayed up all night, memorizing everything vanished from his brain. He stood paralyzed, staring at his estranged sister, the woman his mother had mockingly called a glorified maid just 12 hours earlier. Behind him, Catherine let out a short, sharp gasp that sounded like a physical injury. She shot up from the velvet sofa, her hands flying to her mouth. William dropped his mask of aristocratic calm entirely, his eyes bulging as he stared at the television screen. Fiona? Catherine whispered the name slipping past her lips in a tone of pure, unadulterated horror. What is she doing there? Arthur Caldwell leaned forward, resting his forearms on the mahogany table. He looked from the camera to Fiona, then back to the camera, a cold, predatory smile touching the corners of his mouth. He was enjoying this entirely too much. Mr. Williams Caldwell, said his rich baritone voice echoing through the silent, freezing Connecticut living room. You were saying, you are honored to what exactly? Brandon tried to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak escaped his vocal cords. His hands began to shake so violently that he had to clasp them together behind his back to hide the tremors. He looked at David, who was standing quietly by the television, his face completely impassive. David had known. The analysts had known all along. Arthur, Fiona said smoothly, her voice ringing out crystal clear through the television speakers. Her tone was casual, relaxed, and laced with lethal authority. Is this the pathetic failing tech bro you were telling me about? The one with the fabricated user metrics and the secret second mortgage? Caldwell chuckled, picking up his own glass of champagne. The very same, Fiona. The one who thinks a stolen algorithm and a few fake charts can trick my firm into bailing out his parents' toxic debt. Catherine staggered forward, her knees giving out. She grabbed the back of a leather armchair to steady herself. Her perfectly styled hair fell across her face as she stared at the screen. Fiona, Catherine pleaded, her voice shrill and desperate, abandoning all pretense of dignity. What is going on? Why are you sitting with Arthur Caldwell? Tell him who we are. Tell him Brandon is a genius. Fiona took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne. She lowered the crystal flute and leaned forward, resting her chin on her steepled fingers. Her gaze cut through the digital connection, slicing directly into her mother's panic. I have already told Arthur exactly who you are, Catherine, Fiona replied, her voice dropping to a glacial, uncompromising chill. I forwarded him the audio file of our little chat from last night. The one where you proudly confessed to committing felony wire fraud by draining my trust fund to pay for Brandon's failures. William let out a choked groan and sank back onto the velvet sofa, burying his face in his hands. The game was over. The absolute destruction of their lives was playing out in high definition on their own television screen. You see, Brandon? Fiona continued, shifting her gaze to her brother's sweating, catatonic form. Arthur is not in Connecticut because your little scam was never worth his time. He sent his junior associates to watch you embarrass yourself. Arthur is in Maui because my company, Apex Lifestyle, just facilitated a $90 million acquisition deal with his primary holding firm. I am sitting in this chair because I am his new business partner. You are standing in that freezing room because you are a fraud. Brandon's knees buckled. He collapsed onto the heavy wooden coffee table, knocking over the fake financial printouts and the empty espresso cups. He buried his face against the polished wood, letting out a ragged, humiliating sob. The golden child was shattered, reduced to a weeping, bankrupt criminal on national television. Caldwell leaned closer to the microphone, his expression hardening into a mask of pure ruthlessness. David Caldwell commanded. Yes, sir, David replied instantly from the Connecticut living room. You have the compiled evidence of the software plagiarism and the financial fraud, Caldwell asked. Fully documented and verified, Sir David answered clinically. The entire pitch is a fabrication designed to extort capital for personal debt relief. Excellent, Caldwell said. Forward the complete dossier to the federal authorities and the Securities and Exchange Commission immediately. Let them know we have uncovered a massive wire fraud operation. Then pack your bags and get out of that miserable freezing house. David nodded, tapping a final command on his laptop. Done, sir. Fiona looked at the screen one last time. She looked at her mother hyperventilating and clutching the armchair. She looked at her father weeping silently into his hands. She looked at her brother, a broken, pathetic shell of a man lying amidst his fake documents. She felt no pity. She felt no sadness. She only felt the clean, brilliant warmth of total liberation. Merry Christmas, Brandon, Fiona said softly. She reached out and pressed the button on the console. The television screen in Connecticut went instantly black, cutting the feed and plunging the staged, freezing living room into a deafening, terrifying silence. The trap had sprung, the lies had burned to ash, and the true visionary had already won. The sharp digital trill of the connection chime echoed through the high-grade speakers of the Maui boardroom. It was a crisp, efficient sound that signaled the beginning of the end. I sat comfortably in a plush, ergonomic leather chair, the warm Pacific sun pouring through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows behind me. The light cast a golden glow across the polished mahogany conference table, illuminating the thick financial dossier resting open in front of me. I lifted a porcelain cup to my lips, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my artisan Kona coffee. The rich, dark roast was perfect. Everything was perfect. On the massive digital display mounted on the far wall of our boardroom, the loading screen vanished instantly, replaced by a high-definition, wide-angle view of my parents' formal living room in Connecticut. The contrast was jarring. While Arthur Caldwell and I sat in a climate-controlled, sun-drenched paradise, the scene on the monitor looked like a staged hostage video. The lighting in the Connecticut house was dim and desperately artificial. I could clearly see the edges of the space heaters they had hastily shoved behind the heavy silk curtains, a pathetic attempt to warm the freezing room without revealing their broken furnace. Brandon stood dead center in the frame. He wore a bespoke navy suit that looked 2 sizes too tight against his rigid, panic-stricken posture. His hair was slicked back, but a single, undeniable bead of sweat was already carving a path down his temple. Behind him, perched stiffly on the vintage velvet sofa, were Catherine and William. They looked like wax figures in a museum of fraudulent wealth. Catherine wore a severe, high-collared designer dress, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were bone white. William sat with one leg crossed over the other, attempting to project an aura of aristocratic confidence, though his right foot tapped erratically against the floorboards. Standing in the periphery of the frame, perfectly stoic and entirely unbothered, was David Caldwell's lead analyst. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, the architect of their impending destruction, waiting for the final act to commence. Brandon stepped forward, planting his expensive loafers onto the Persian rug. He locked his eyes on the camera lens, unleashing a wide, blindingly aggressive smile that did not reach his panicked eyes. He was ready to perform. He was ready to unleash his plagiarized tech jargon and secure the millions he needed to bail out his catastrophic failures. Mr. Caldwell, Merry Christmas. Brandon boomed his voice, echoing loudly through the digital feed. I am honored to. Brandon's voice died instantly. The rehearsed words simply evaporated from his throat, replaced by a suffocating, terrifying silence. On his end, the camera angle from our Maui boardroom had automatically widened to encompass the entire table. He was no longer just looking at Arthur Caldwell. He was looking at the person seated directly to the billionaire's right. He was looking at me. I did not wave. I did not flinch. I simply lowered my coffee cup, rested my hands lightly on the cover of the financial dossier, and offered my brother a look of mild, devastating boredom. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Catherine let out a sharp, audible gasp that sounded as though all the oxygen had been violently sucked from her lungs. She shot up from the velvet sofa, dropping the prop clipboard she had been holding to complete her executive mother aesthetic. It clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. She stepped into the frame, her carefully applied makeup entirely unable to mask the sheer, unadulterated horror warping her features. Fiona. Catherine whispered the name, slipping past her lips like a curse word. William was on his feet a split second later. His mask of refined country club composure shattered completely. The sight of me, the daughter he had spent a lifetime dismissing, sitting shoulder to shoulder with one of the most powerful venture capitalists on the eastern seaboard, short-circuited his brain. His immediate defense mechanism was the only one he knew: absolute blistering condescension. "What is the meaning of this?" William demanded, his voice trembling with a potent mix of rage and absolute terror. He marched forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Brandon, gripping the edge of the coffee table. He refused to address me, directing his panicked fury entirely at the billionaire seated to my left. "Mr. Caldwell, I must profoundly apologize for this disruption." William sputtered, his face turning an unhealthy shade of crimson. "I have absolutely no idea how my disgraceful daughter managed to infiltrate your facility. She has absolutely no business being in the same room as you. I assure you, whatever she is doing there, whether she is serving coffee or working on the catering staff, she does not represent us. Please have your security remove her immediately so we can proceed with this critical investment meeting." I took another slow sip of my coffee, feeling a profound cold satisfaction wash over me. They were reacting exactly as I knew they would. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, so deeply entrenched in their delusion of superiority, that their brains physically could not process the reality of the situation. To William, the only logical explanation for my presence in a billionaire's boardroom was that I was the hired help. Brandon snapped out of his catatonic shock, and his fear instantly transmuted into rabid, frantic aggression. He pointed a trembling finger at the camera lens, his face slick with sweat, his tailored suit suddenly looking like a straitjacket. "Are you stalking my investors?" Brandon yelled, his voice cracking horribly. "Is that what this is, Fiona? You found out about my pitch and you tracked Mr. Caldwell down to ruin my life?" Brandon turned his frantic gaze toward Arthur, holding his hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Mr. Caldwell, you have to understand my sister is deeply unstable. She runs a pathetic little party planning gig out on the West Coast. She has always been bitterly jealous of my success in the tech sector. She is trying to sabotage my company out of pure spite. You cannot listen to a single word she says. She is a fraud. She is a caterer. Get her out of your office." In the background of the Connecticut living room, I watched David slowly cross his arms over his chest. He did not intervene. He simply stood there, a silent sentinel, watching the Williams family dig their own grave with remarkable speed and efficiency. I did not shout back. I did not defend my business or my sanity. I simply turned a page in the dossier, glancing at the fabricated user acquisition metrics David's team had extracted from Brandon's stolen code. The numbers were hilariously tragic. I looked up at Arthur Caldwell, offering him a slight knowing smile. Arthur did not smile back. His expression was a mask of glacial, terrifying authority. He placed his hands flat on the mahogany table. The movement was subtle, but it radiated such immense power that Brandon instantly snapped his mouth shut. The silence in the Connecticut house became absolute, suffocating, and heavy with impending doom. Caldwell looked directly into the camera lens, his sharp, predatory eyes narrowing as he evaluated the sweating, terrified men on the screen. "Let me clarify a fundamental misunderstanding," Mr. Williams Caldwell said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded total obedience. "Fiona is not bothering me. She did not infiltrate my office. She is not serving coffee, and she is certainly not a caterer." Catherine swayed slightly on her feet, grabbing William's arm for support. The color had drained completely from her face. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers together. "I did not ask you to conduct this pitch remotely because my schedule was full in Connecticut. I ordered this remote presentation because I needed to fly to Hawaii. I flew here specifically to pitch her." William let out a choked, wet sound as if he were physically choking on the words. "You pitched her," he managed to wheeze. "Yes," Caldwell stated flatly, gesturing toward me with a single respectful nod. "Your daughter is not an intruder. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Lifestyle. As of yesterday afternoon, my holding firm finalized a $90 million acquisition of her company." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of an entire universe collapsing. Brandon physically staggered backward, his knees buckling slightly before he caught himself on the edge of the whiteboard he had spent all night filling with fake charts. $90 million. The number echoed in the room, a staggering, impossible figure that completely obliterated their entire worldview. She is not just my newest executive. Caldwell continued, his voice slicing through their shock like a scalpel. She is my principal partner on this specific venture capital acquisition fund. I do not make the decisions regarding microcap technology investments in this portfolio. I leave those evaluations entirely to the experts who have proven they can build sustainable, highly profitable operations from the ground up without relying on fraud. Caldwell leaned closer to the microphone, delivering the final devastating hook with masterful precision. Ms. Williams makes the final call on all investments in this sector, Caldwell said, his eyes cold and unyielding. You are not pitching me, Brandon. You are pitching her. You may begin whenever you are ready. The silence that consumed the Connecticut living room was absolute and suffocating. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was the faint, desperate humming of the hidden space heaters, trying and failing to fight off the winter chill. Brandon stood frozen in the center of the Persian rug. His mouth hung slightly open, opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water, but his vocal cords refused to produce a single syllable. The arrogant, rehearsed swagger he had worn just seconds ago dissolved into pure, unadulterated panic. I sat comfortably in my plush leather chair in the Maui boardroom, bathed in warm Pacific sunlight, and let him drown in the silence. I did not rush to speak. I wanted him to feel the crushing weight of reality settling over him. On the side of our massive digital display, a grid of smaller video panels illuminated. Arthur Caldwell had opened the secure connection to his broader executive review committee. 15 senior financial analysts from across the globe were now logged into the call, watching the live feed in complete silence. They were the jury, and I was the executioner. "Take your time, Brandon," I finally said, my voice ringing out clear and relaxed through the high-definition speakers in their living room. "I know you stayed up all night preparing those colorful charts on your whiteboard. It would be a shame not to give you a moment to compose yourself." Brandon swallowed hard, a visible gulp that made his Adam's apple bob frantically. He looked at the camera, then darted a terrified glance at David, the lead analyst standing stoically by the fireplace. David simply stared back, his face a mask of professional indifference. Behind Brandon, William attempted to salvage the unsalvageable. He stood up, forcing a hollow, wavering chuckle that sounded like crunching dry leaves. "Fiona, my dear," William stammered, gripping the back of the velvet sofa so tightly his knuckles turned white. "What a wonderful surprise! We had no idea you were working with Mr. Caldwell. Obviously, there has been some sort of miscommunication here. This is a family matter. We should handle this privately offline without taking up any more of these gentlemen's valuable holiday time." I shifted my gaze to my father. He looked incredibly small in that moment, stripped of his country club bravado. "There is no miscommunication," William the Sir stated flatly, refusing to call him Dad. "And this is absolutely not a family matter. This is a formal venture capital investment review. You invited my firm into your home to audit a business. We are simply conducting the audit." I turned my attention back to the center of the frame. "David," I commanded, my tone shifting into clinical authority, "please override the local presentation feed, Project Dossier Section 4, onto their main television screen. Let us walk the Williams family through our preliminary findings." "Yes, Ms. Williams," David replied instantly. He tapped a command on his laptop keyboard. The image of Caldwell and me shrank to a picture-in-picture box in the corner of their screen. The main display was suddenly flooded with lines of highlighted source code scrolling rapidly alongside back-end server logs and digital diagnostic reports. Brandon let out a sharp, panicked breath, taking a physical step backward as his fraudulent empire was plastered across his own living room wall in glowing neon text. "Let us begin with your proprietary algorithm," I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the mahogany conference table. "The machine learning framework you have been pitching to investors as a revolutionary paradigm shift in digital engagement. Our engineering team analyzed it at 2 o'clock this morning. It is a direct copy and paste from an open-source developer forum. You did not even possess the technical competence to remove the original author's copyright notes hidden in the back-end comments. You changed the interface color scheme to blue, slapped your logo on the dashboard, and called it innovation. It took our analysts exactly 4 minutes to reverse engineer your entire system. Brandon's face drained of all color, leaving him a sickly pale gray. Fiona, wait, you do not understand. He choked out, raising his hands defensively. It is a wireframe. It is a beta test. We are iterating the foundation. The code is just a placeholder until we secure the funding to hire a real development team. You are stealing, I corrected him, my voice cutting through his pathetic excuses like a serrated blade. And you are doing it poorly. You do not have a product, you have a downloaded template. I nodded at the camera. David moved to the user acquisition metrics. The screen flashed again. The code was replaced by a massive spreadsheet displaying user login data, email addresses, and session times. You claimed 60,000 active daily users, I read aloud, referencing the digital copy of his pitch deck on my own tablet. You promised aggressive organic market growth. Yet our server audit confirms you have exactly 0 actual human users interacting with this software. Your entire database is generated by a basic automated loop script. User 001, user 002, linked to sequentially generated dummy email addresses. Your servers have not registered a single organic human click in 4 months. Your company is a digital ghost town. It is a completely empty shell. Catherine could not contain herself any longer. She lunged forward, grabbing Brandon's arm and stepping into the center of the camera frame. She glared at me, her face contorted with a mixture of terror and fierce, toxic maternal protection. "Stop this right now, Fiona!" Catherine shrieked, her voice echoing harshly. "How dare you do this to your brother? He has been working himself to the bone. He is a visionary. You are just doing this because you have always been jealous of him. You are deliberately twisting the data to humiliate us in front of your boss." I looked at my mother. I looked at the desperate clawing entitlement etched into every line of her face. I felt a profound sense of pity, not for her, but for the girl I used to be, the girl who had spent 20 years believing this woman's approval was something worth earning. Arthur Caldwell let out a low, dark chuckle beside me, swirling the champagne in his glass, highly entertained by Catherine's outburst. Working himself to the bone at what, mother? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet and perfectly steady. Defrauding you. Let us talk about the funding. Let us talk about the financial foundation of this incredible visionary enterprise. I tapped my tablet, casting a new set of documents onto their living room screen. It was a comprehensive map of their personal financial records, legally obtained during the deep dive background check required for any corporate acquisition. You think I do not know where the seed money came from? I challenged her, watching her eyes widen as she recognized her own bank statements displayed on the television. I have seen the ledgers. You let him drain my entire college fund when I was 18 years old because his first brilliant startup idea needed capital. When that inevitable failure collapsed, you let him tap directly into William's retirement accounts. And when that dried up, you took out 3 separate high-interest loans. William collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. A wretched guttural sound escaped his throat. All of those loans are co-signed by you, I continued, ruthlessly refusing to look away. All of them are secured against the equity of the house you are currently sitting in. You even took out a secret second mortgage 6 months ago just to keep this illusion alive. The 15 senior analysts watching the feed remained perfectly still, processing the sheer magnitude of the financial destruction playing out before them. You burned through a lifetime of financial security, I stated, making sure my voice carried absolute, unwavering finality. You mortgaged your entire existence, your home, your retirement, and my future, all to fund a product that does not actually exist. You enabled a golden child who is nothing more than a parasite wearing a bespoke suit. And you did it all just to maintain the illusion that you were better than everyone else. The absolute truth shattered whatever fragile delusion was keeping Brandon upright. The reality of his situation finally crushed through his arrogant facade. The venture capital firm knew everything. The SEC would have the files within the hour. The fraud was exposed, the money was gone, and the house was lost. Brandon broke. He let out a ragged, high-pitched sob and physically crumpled. The tailored navy suit bagged around him as he dropped to his knees on the hardwood floor right in front of the coffee table. He looked up at the camera, tears streaming down his face, completely abandoning any shred of dignity. "Fiona, please!" Brandon begged, his voice a wet, pathetic whine. "Please, I am begging you. Do not do this. They will take the house. Mom and Dad will be on the street. I will go to federal prison for wire fraud. I know I messed up. I know I lied. But you have $90 million. You are a principal partner. You can fix this. Just approve the funding. Treat it as a bailout. Give us the money to cover the loans and we will walk away. Please, Fiona, you are my sister. You have to save me. I will lose everything." He was openly weeping now, his hands gripping the edge of the coffee table. A grown man reduced to a sniveling, desperate child pleading for his sister to clean up his catastrophic mess one last time. Catherine stood paralyzed beside him, tears ruining her heavy makeup, staring at me with wide, pleading eyes. William refused to look up from his hands. I looked at the pathetic display on the monitor. I looked at Arthur Caldwell, who gave me a single firm nod of absolute approval. I looked at the grid of 15 elite analysts, witnessing the destruction of a fraud. I felt the phantom weight of my ruined college fund, the years of insults, the countless holidays spent being told I was a disappointment, because I chose to actually work instead of pretend. I sat up perfectly straight, adjusting the lapels of my white Armani blazer. I clasped my hands together on the polished mahogany table and looked directly into my brother's terrified, weeping eyes. "Brandon Williams," I announced, my voice ringing out with cold, flawless professional authority. "On behalf of the Caldwell Acquisition Fund, and in my official capacity as principal partner, I am formally and irrevocably denying your request for capital investment. Your company is a fraudulent enterprise. Your metrics are fabricated. You are entirely uninvestable." I did not wait for his scream. I reached forward and severed the connection, plunging their world into darkness while I remained sitting in the sun. The absolute finality of my words hung in the freezing air of the Connecticut living room. Brandon remained on his knees, his forehead pressed against the edge of the mahogany coffee table, his tailored suit completely ruined by his own sweat and tears. He was sobbing loudly now, sharp, ugly sounds that echoed off the high, peeling ceiling. The 15 elite financial analysts on the digital grid remained completely silent, their faces unreadable masks of professional detachment as they observed the spectacular collapse of a corporate fraud. For a long, agonizing moment, the only other sound in the room was the desperate rattling hum of the hidden space heaters trying to fight back the winter chill. Then the shock finally wore off, and the sheer, unadulterated humiliation set in. Williams snapped. The aristocratic facade he had meticulously cultivated for 40 years, the mask of the sophisticated, wealthy patriarch, completely disintegrated. His face turned a dangerous, mottled shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched collar. He stepped over his weeping, broken son, as if Brandon were nothing more than a discarded piece of furniture, marching directly toward the massive television screen. "You vindictive, spiteful little wretch," William roared, his voice cracking with raw, unhinged fury. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at the camera lens. "You planned this. You orchestrated this entire circus just to humiliate your own flesh and blood in front of these strangers. You tracked down our investors. You fed them lies. You have always been a bitter, jealous girl. You could never stand seeing your brother succeed where you failed." Catherine surged to her feet, joining her husband on the front lines of their delusion. She clutched the high collar of her designer dress, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the fabric. "How could you do this to us, Fiona?" Catherine shrieked, her voice shrill and trembling with toxic indignation. "We gave you life. We raised you. We provided for you. And this is how you repay us, by sabotaging your brother's one chance at true greatness. You are trying to destroy this family out of pure petty spite. I sat in my plush leather chair in the sun-drenched Maui boardroom, resting my hands lightly on the polished conference table. Beside me, Arthur Caldwell watched the screens with a look of clinical fascination, observing my parents' meltdown, as if he were studying a particularly aggressive species of insect. I did not raise my voice. I did not interrupt their frantic, desperate shouting. I simply let them burn through their remaining adrenaline, watching them flail against the inescapable reality of their situation. "You listen to me!" William bellowed, slamming his fist against the mantel of the empty stone fireplace. A cloud of fine dust rained down onto the hearth. "You have disgraced the Williams name for the last time. You are dead to me. Do you hear me, Fiona? You are absolutely dead to us. You are disowned. You are no longer a part of this family." William took another step closer to the television, his breath fogging in the freezing air of the living room. "And if you ever try to set foot on my property again, I will personally have you arrested for trespassing. This is my estate. This is my home. You are banished from it forever. Do not ever show your face here again." The echo of his screaming faded into the corners of the cavernous room. Brandon was still crying on the floor. Catherine was breathing heavily, glaring at me through the screen with pure venom. David, the lead analyst, stood silently by the doorway, his arms crossed, watching the implosion with absolute stoicism. I reached for my porcelain cup and took a slow, deliberate sip of my artisan Kona coffee. The rich, dark roast was warm and comforting. I set the cup down with a quiet clink against the saucer. "Are you quite finished, William?" I asked, my voice ringing out clear, cold, and perfectly level through their high-grade speakers. William bared his teeth, his chest heaving. "I am finished with you." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, my expression shifting into pure, unyielding ice. "You have used that exact same threat against me since I was 16 years old," I stated, slicing through his manufactured rage with surgical precision. "You used it when I asked you to co-sign a modest business loan to start my first company. You stood in that exact same living room and told me I was a terrible investment. You told me I lacked the intellect and the pedigree to survive in the corporate world. You told me that if I embarrassed the Williams family name by failing, I would not be welcome in your home. You used the threat of exclusion as a weapon to keep me small, to ensure I never outshined your precious, incompetent golden child." Catherine opened her mouth to argue, but I raised a single hand, silencing her instantly. "I built an empire with zero capital and zero support, because I was terrified of proving you right." I continued, staring directly into my father's panicked eyes. "But here is the fundamental flaw in your current tantrum, William. You cannot kick me out of the family. I left this toxic, parasitic family 5 years ago. I severed that tie the day I realized my worth was entirely dependent on my willingness to be a stepping stone for Brandon. So no, you cannot kick me out of the family." I paused, letting the silence stretch for a fraction of a second before delivering the absolute fatal blow. "But I can definitely kick you out of my house." William froze. The aggressive, domineering posture melted away, replaced by total confusion. He blinked rapidly, looking around the walls of the grand colonial estate. "Your house? Have you completely lost your mind? I bought this property 30 years ago. My name is on the deed. This is my estate." I offered him a thin, devastating smile. "David, please override the screen again. Pull up file directory 9. "Yes, Ms. Williams." David replied from the corner of the Connecticut living room. He tapped his keyboard. The live feed of Caldwell and me shrank back into the corner of the screen. The main television display flashed, projecting a highly detailed, legally notarized document. It was a property deed complete with the official seal of the state of Connecticut, highlighted with bright yellow digital markers. "Let us review the timeline of your financial ruin," William the First instructed, adopting the tone of a professor lecturing a particularly slow student. "You burned through your liquid savings to fund Brandon's fabricated startup. When that cash evaporated, you took out 3 consecutive high-interest personal loans. You leveraged the initial equity of this estate to secure that debt. But Brandon's fake company was bleeding capital too fast. He needed server space. He needed marketing materials. He needed bespoke suits to play the part of a successful CEO. William was staring at the television screen, his lips parting in silent terror as he recognized the document projected on his wall. So 6 months ago, you and Catherine made a profoundly stupid decision. I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly. You went to a predatory lending firm and took out a secret second mortgage on the estate. You leveraged the absolute final drop of equity you possessed just to keep Brandon's illusion alive for a few more months. You gambled your entire existence on a plagiarized software program. Catherine let out a sharp whimper, backing away from the television as if it were emitting radiation. But you miscalculated the interest rates, I stated flatly. The balloon payments kicked in 90 days ago. You completely exhausted your credit lines. You missed your first payment. Then you missed your second. By the third missed payment, the lending firm officially classified your second mortgage as highly distressed toxic debt. You defaulted, William. The bank immediately initiated the preliminary stages of foreclosure. No, William gasped, shaking his head frantically. No, we had an arrangement. We were negotiating a grace period. The bank assured us we had time to secure venture capital. Banks do not care about your fabricated venture capital, William Forsyth corrected him coldly. Banks care about liquidity. They wanted that toxic asset off their ledgers before the end of the fiscal year. They prepared to quietly auction off your distressed debt to a private buyer to avoid a lengthy, expensive public foreclosure process. I tapped my tablet, advancing the slide on the television screen. The view zoomed in on the bottom half of the legal document, highlighting a massive block of text detailing a cash transfer. 4 weeks ago, a private holding firm stepped in, I explained, watching William's eyes track the highlighted words. This firm offered to purchase your distressed debt in its entirety, paying the lending bank in straight liquid cash. The bank immediately transferred the note, the leverage, and the ultimate title rights to this anonymous buyer. William read the name of the purchasing firm aloud, his voice trembling so badly the words barely formed. Apex Holdings Limited Liability Company. I folded my hands together on the table. Apex Holdings, LLC, is a private asset management subsidiary, I stated. It is entirely funded, entirely directed, and entirely owned by me. I am the sole managing director and the sole equity holder. The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. Brandon stopped crying, lifting his tear-streaked, sweaty face from the coffee table to stare at the screen. Catherine covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror. I bought your debt, William, I said, the words falling like heavy stones. I hold the note. I own the leverage. I control the title. You do not own that estate anymore. I do. You are standing in my formal living room. You are shouting at me in my house. You are wearing heavy winter coats indoors because you cannot afford to pay the heating bill for a property that currently belongs to my corporate portfolio. You are officially my tenants, and as of this exact moment, your lease has been permanently terminated. You are 6 months in arrears on this property, I stated, my voice echoing through their speakers, with the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. Since the day my holding firm acquired your distressed debt, you have not made a single attempt to reconcile the balance. You have ignored the certified letters. You have dodged the phone calls from my legal team. You assumed you could hide behind your country club reputation and a few locked doors. But reputation does not pay the mortgage, William. Cash does. And you are entirely out of cash. William's mouth opened and closed. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a ledge and was waiting to hit the ground. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes darting from the crown molding to the antique chandelier, as if expecting the house itself to defend him. You cannot do this, William gasped, his voice thin and reedy. This is a historic property. We have legal rights. There is a process. You cannot just throw us out into the street. We require a formal hearing. The hearing already happened, Dad, I replied softly, letting the words slip out with heavy, deliberate irony. It happened the moment you defaulted on a predatory loan to fund a criminal enterprise. You signed away your rights the day you put your signature next to Brandon's on those falsified loan applications. My legal team filed the final foreclosure documentation with the county clerk at exactly 9 o'clock this morning, Eastern Standard Time. The judge stamped it 20 minutes later. There are no loopholes left for you to squeeze through. There are no more favors to call in. I paused, letting the reality of their complete destitution settle into their bones. Consider this your formal, legally binding 30-day eviction notice, I said. You have until the end of January to pack whatever personal belongings my auditors do not seize as collateral and vacate my property. Merry Christmas. The words struck Catherine with physical force. Her legs simply gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the vintage velvet sofa, but there was no grace in the movement. She hit the cushions hard, her manicured hands flying up to grip her perfectly styled hair. A loud, wretched wail tore from her throat. It was an ugly, guttural sound, entirely devoid of the polished, aristocratic restraint she had spent her entire life cultivating. She rocked back and forth, sobbing uncontrollably, mourning the death of her social status, her wealth, and her entire identity. Beside her, William remained frozen. He stared blankly at the digital display, his eyes wide and vacant. The realization of his colossal failure was visibly crushing him. He had spent his entire life treating me like an embarrassing inconvenience, pouring every ounce of his love, his money, and his reputation into Brandon. He had sacrificed his own daughter on the altar of his son's non-existent genius. And now he was staring at the direct result of that lifelong favoritism. He was homeless. He was penniless. He was utterly disgraced. On the floor, Brandon had curled into a fetal position. The golden child was entirely broken. His expensive Italian loafers scuffed against the hardwood as he rocked himself, babbling incoherently about beta tests and server migrations. He was no longer a tech visionary. He was a fraud facing imminent federal indictment, drowning in massive debt, with no parents left to bail him out. He had finally hit a wall that Mommy and Daddy could not buy his way through. Standing near the stone fireplace, David observed the pathetic scene with total clinical detachment. He did not offer a word of comfort. He did not offer a tissue. He simply looked at the weeping family with the mild disgust of a man watching a pest infestation being eradicated. David tapped a final command into his sleek laptop and snapped it shut. The sharp click of the closing computer cut through Catherine's wailing. He turned to his two junior associates and gave them a single silent nod. They immediately packed up their own tablets, their faces entirely devoid of sympathy. David stepped forward, addressing William, who was still staring blankly at the wall. "Mr. Williams," David said, his voice crisp and professional. "As per Mr. Caldwell's instructions, my team has successfully transmitted the complete archive of your fraudulent financial records, your forged user metrics, and your plagiarized software architecture to the Securities and Exchange Commission. A secondary file has been dispatched to the Federal Prosecutor's Office for the District of Connecticut. I strongly advise you to retain criminal defense counsel immediately." William did not respond. He simply blinked, a single tear escaping his eye and tracing a path down his flushed cheek. David turned his attention to the camera, offering me a polite, deferential bow. "Ms. Williams, my team is departing the premises now. We will forward the final audit summary to your secure server by the end of the hour. Happy holidays." "Thank you, David," I replied smoothly. "Safe travels." David turned on his heel and walked toward the foyer, his associates falling into step behind him. They did not look back. I watched on the screen as David opened the massive oak front door. He walked out into the freezing Connecticut winter and deliberately left the door wide open. A harsh, howling gust of icy wind immediately swept into the staged living room, violently fluttering the heavy silk drapes and knocking over the empty espresso cups on the coffee table. The freezing reality of the outside world had finally breached the walls of their sanctuary. On the screen, Catherine looked up from her hands. Her face was a ruin of running mascara and splotchy red skin. She saw the open door. She felt the freezing wind. She turned her desperate, pleading eyes back to the television screen, staring directly into the camera lens. "Fiona," Catherine begged, her voice hoarse and broken. "Please, You cannot do this. You are my daughter. I am your mother. We are family. You cannot leave us like this." I looked at the woman who had spent 2 decades making me feel entirely invisible. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no lingering desire for her approval. The emotional tether had been completely severed. "You stopped being my mother a long time ago, Catherine," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "I am just the landlord now, and it is time for you to leave." I reached forward my hand, hovering over the control console built into the mahogany table. I did not wait for her to scream again. I pressed the firm red button to disconnect the feed. The massive digital display on the far wall of the boardroom went instantly black. The connection was severed. The shouting, the crying, the howling wind, it all vanished, replaced by the profound, luxurious silence of the Hawaiian afternoon. I let out a slow, deep breath, feeling the last remaining tension drain from my shoulders. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried since childhood, the constant need to prove myself to people who were determined to misunderstand me, was gone entirely. I felt incredibly light. To my left, Arthur Caldwell let out a soft sigh of appreciation. He picked up his crystal flute of champagne and took a deliberate sip, savoring the moment. "Well," Caldwell said, a genuine predatory smile spreading across his face, "I must admit, Fiona, I have sat through thousands of acquisition meetings in my life. I have seen hostile takeovers, corporate espionage, and boardrooms devolve into physical brawls. But that was without question the most efficient, brutal, and flawlessly executed dismantling of a fraudulent enterprise I have ever had the pleasure of witnessing." I turned to look at him, returning his smile with one of my own. "I consider it a routine house cleaning, Arthur. You cannot build a solid foundation until you clear away the rot." Caldwell chuckled, setting his champagne glass down. He reached across the table and pulled a thick, leather-bound folio toward him. He opened it, revealing the final printed documents for the acquisition of Apex Lifestyle. He smoothed his hand over the crisp, heavy paper. "You have proven your point, Ms. Williams." Caldwell said, his tone shifting into a register of deep professional respect. "You do not just understand the market. You understand the psychology of leverage. You understand how to identify a weakness and apply exactly the right amount of pressure to shatter it. That is a rare commodity. It is exactly the kind of ruthlessness I require in a principal partner." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a heavy gold fountain pen. He laid it gently on the table right next to the signature line of the acquisition contract. He slid the entire folio across the polished mahogany surface until it rested directly in front of me. "The $90 million valuation is fully authorized," Caldwell stated. "The transfer protocols are in place. The venture capital portfolio is yours to direct. Welcome to the firm, partner." I looked down at the contract. It was a masterpiece of legal and financial architecture. It represented everything I had fought for in the dark, everything I had built while my family laughed at my ambition. It was the ultimate, undeniable proof of my worth. I picked up the gold pen. It felt heavy and perfectly balanced in my hand. I did not hesitate. I pressed the nib to the paper and signed my name with a smooth, sweeping motion. The ink dried, instantly sealing the deal. Apex Lifestyle was elevated. My fortune was secured. My future was entirely my own. I closed the leather folio and pushed it back across the table. Arthur Caldwell nodded, taking the documents with a look of profound satisfaction. I stood up from my plush leather chair. I smoothed the front of my white Armani blazer, feeling the crisp, flawless fabric against my skin. I did not look back at the blank television screen. I walked past the mahogany table, past the silent, waiting servers, and moved directly toward the massive glass walls at the far end of the boardroom. I reached out and grasped the heavy chrome handle of the sliding glass door. With a smooth, effortless pull, I slid the glass aside and stepped out onto the wide, sun-bleached balcony. The heat of the Hawaiian afternoon hit me instantly. It was a brilliant, radiant warmth that soaked deep into my bones, chasing away the phantom chill of the Connecticut winter. I walked to the edge of the balcony, resting my hands on the glass railing. Below me, the pristine turquoise waters of the Pacific Ocean stretched out toward the endless horizon. The sound of the waves crashing against the shoreline was powerful and rhythmic, a steady natural heartbeat that drowned out the ghosts of my past. I closed my eyes and tilted my head up toward the sun. I let the warm ocean breeze wash over my face, carrying the scent of salt and blooming hibiscus. The air was clean and pure. The toxicity, the manipulation, the constant draining battle for approval was thousands of miles away, locked in a freezing empty house that I now owned. I opened my eyes and looked out at the brilliant blue expanse. I had dismantled the golden child. I had exposed the fraud. I had reclaimed my life, my power, and my future. I stood on the balcony, a self-made titan bathing in the tropical sun, and for the first time in my entire life, I was exactly where I belonged. In many dysfunctional family dynamics, we are often assigned a role before we even have a chance to define ourselves. Perhaps you were cast as the failure, the black sheep, or the troublesome one, simply because you refuse to follow a script written by others. The story of those who break free, like the characters who reclaim their power from toxic environments, teaches us a profound lesson about the nature of worth. When we are constantly belittled, it is easy to internalize those projections as our reality. However, true strength lies not in proving your worth to those who have already decided you have none, but in recognizing that your value exists independently of their approval. The sweet revenge found in these narratives is rarely just about the public downfall of an antagonist. It is about the quiet, agonizing work of building a life where you are finally the architect of your own destiny. Reclaiming your narrative requires courage. It involves setting boundaries that may feel like betrayal to a family that thrives on your compliance, and it requires the resilience to walk through the fire of their judgment to reach a place of genuine autonomy. You do not need to hold their hands or wait for their permission to succeed. Often the very people who dismiss your vision are the ones who lack the foresight to see it. Your success is not a weapon to be used against them, but a byproduct of a life lived on your own terms. When you stop chasing the validation of people who never intended to give it to you, you become unstoppable. Have you ever had to break free from a toxic script others wrote for you? I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below, and if this message gave you the strength to stand up for your truth, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience and reclaiming your power. You are the author of your life. Make it a masterpiece.